Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Ned. He hated the books. His father had made it look so easy, had made all the numbers dance, had been able to recall the most astonishing details of all the trade and administration of the North. But he was not his father, and he hated the books, the ledgers, the endless administration, but it had to be done. The North wouldn't run itself. And besides, you could tell what was happening when you looked at the ebb and flow of goods around the North. More trade going to Bear Island meant that the Mormonts were getting paranoid about the Ironborn again. More requests from the Wall for, well, everything, meant that the plight of the Night's Watch was getting worse, and he sighed and made another note to remind Robert that something had to be done to bolster the Wall before the wildlings paid another visit. More complaints from the Dreadfort meant that Rosebolton was getting worried about something, yet more complaints from the Corstarks meant that they were getting ambitious again. Well, they all had their concerns. Winter was always coming. Knuckles rapped on the door to his solar, and he looked up. Lil Win was standing in the doorway, clutching at his chain and looking concerned. "What is it, Lil Win?" The older man walked in and closed the door behind him. "Your pardon for disturbing you, Eddard, but I am getting very worried about Robb. Something is very wrong with him." Ned Stark put his quill down and straightened up from the books with a sigh. "I know Kat and I were discussing it last night. Yet whenever I ask him what is amiss, he just looks at me with that strained look and makes an excuse, and hurries away. I know not where to. I think I have an answer to that riddle, or at least a part of it. I just found him in the Godswood, praying before the Heart Tree. He's always been devout, but never have I seen him pray as fervently as I just now witnessed." Ned looked at him. "Did you hear his prayers?" "A snatch of them." He was asking why he had been sent back and what he was to do now. "Sent back?" Ned frowned. "Sent back from where?" "I know not." He must have heard me coming, because he looked up, smiled a smile that was more a grimace, and then left. Lowen paused and then seemed to come to a decision. "I think that Robb is also the one who has been in the library so much of late. I knew that someone was looking through the books a lot, but I did not know who until I overheard Robb muttering a piece of doggerel from the books about the old gods. And old Nan told me that Robb has been pestering her for more of the old tales." This really took him aback. The old gods? Why would he be seeking knowledge of the old gods? Lewin spread his hands in bafflement. "I know not, Eddard. As I said, I am concerned." Ned stood and walked to the fire, where he warmed his slightly stiff hands. "Whatever is amiss with Robb, it started 10 days ago, when he entered the Great Hall to break his fast." "I agree," Lewin muttered. "But what could have happened?" Ned thought back. He had been breaking his fast that morning, with Kat and his family, along with Jon and Theon. Robb had been missing, and he had been about to irritably order a servant to go and find his eldest son, when all of a sudden he had arrived. He had looked as if he had dressed hurriedly, and then run as fast as he could, because his chest was heaving, and his reaction on seeing Ned had been a strange one. He turned white as a sheet, and then reeled. "Father." He had said the word as if he had been stunned, and then looked around the table and staggered forwards to it. He had hugged Bran and Rickon, both of whom had wriggled and squirmed and protested, hugged Arya, who had gone bright red with fury, and Sansa, who had rolled her eyes, and then stood and stared again at Ned. "Robb, are you quite well?" Kat had asked in some startlement. "I am quite well, Mother," Robb had replied, still in that stunned tone of voice. "Father, it is good to see you again." Ned had frowned. "I was here last night," he had said carefully. "I haven't gone anywhere." Robb paused, seemingly choked up about something, and then had caught sight of Jon and Theon. A great smile had split his face at the first, followed by a murderous glare at the latter. "Theon," he said, the word in a low, equally murderous tone that made the Greyjoy boy blink in bafflement. Robb had then paused, collected himself visibly, and then sank into his usual place, before eating quickly and as if his mind was on anything but the food. And then he had left, leaving everyone staring after him worriedly. "Your children have been asking after him a lot, Eddard." He brushes them off, but they are as worried. He avoids Theon Greyjoy as if he is diseased. And Jory Castle has told me that he found Robb staring from the outer wall of Winterfell in the direction of the Wolf's Wood, muttering under his breath, and... He broke off, obviously reluctant to speak. "Go on, Luwin," Ned prompted. Tell me. Roderick Castle tells me that his fighting style has changed. He swings a sword with the eyes of a man who has fought in battle, Roderick says. The eyes of man who has killed, and I do not doubt him. His eyes are different. Eddard, he has the eyes of an older man. Ned Stark looked at his old friend and advisor. I had thought that no one else had noticed that, had hoped it. What should I do? Every time I try to confront him, he makes an excuse and leaves. Luwin nodded thoughtfully. I had noticed that. I suggest that you talk to him in the Godswood. He seeks solace there. Perhaps you can talk to him there. Robb, he didn't know what to do. That was irony writ large. That was, he had commanded thousands of men in battle. He had routed Lannister armies like chaff on the wind, and now he was reduced to sitting in the Godswood and thinking up mad desperate plan after mad desperate plan, only to abandon each one as impossible. How had he gotten here? How had he gone from that cold, hard floor in Walder Frey's banqueting chamber, feeling the life drain out of him from the various quarrels in him before the blade of Roast fucking Bolton had ended it all, to all the way back to Winterfell, before his father had gone south and died in the maze of corruption that was King's Landing? How had it happened? Why had it happened? It had taken a day to convince himself that he wasn't dreaming, that this wasn't some last mad fever delirium before his death. That father and Bran and Rickon and mother weren't dead, and Sansa a prisoner. That Arya wasn't missing, and that Jon wasn't lost to the wall. And as for Theon, he scrubbed his hands through his hair roughly and forced himself to think. He had worked out that the date was about 2 months before the news had come of the death of Jon Arryn. There was still time to change things, if that was what he was there to do. He couldn't imagine any other reason for whatever had happened to happen, and he had wasted 10 days of precious time, one of which had been spent on the wall, trying to sense Grey Wind. The problem was that he couldn't think of any way to warn Father. Well, any way of warning Father that wouldn't lead to him being confined under the tender mercies of Maester Luwin, for a head injury that might explain his evident insanity in claiming to have been sent back from the future. Somehow you're going to have your head cut off by the violent little shit who thinks that he's the son of King Robert, but who instead is the son of the Queen's incestuous relationship with her own brother. Wouldn't go down very well. Very well then. A hint perhaps. Something about warning Jon Arryn that he was about to be poisoned, probably by the Lannisters. But what proof could he give, other than a tale that would make him seem insane? He didn't know what he should do. If this was a military problem, then he could think it over and come up with a solution in an instant. But it was not. This was politics, and he hated politics. It was his one weakness. He looked at the heart tree. Why did he keep coming here? He had tried praying, to no avail. If the old gods spoke to him, then he did not hear them. The books were next to useless, speaking of rumor and folk tales and old sayings. He could sense something in them though, hints left by men dead centuries ago. Tales of magic. Luwin would scorn them, but what else but magic could have brought him back? Old Nan's tales had been no better. Not really. Tales that had been told and retold down over the centuries had weakened them, drained the truth out of them. But again there were hints here and there. The children of the forest. The others. Tales of dread and awe. Once they must have been words to hear and learn from. Now they were little more than empty ramblings. Robb stood and walked to the heart tree. He knew, somehow, that it was important. He could feel it. Someone, something, had brought him back. Something linked to the heart tree and the old gods. Something with power, and power needed strength. Not strength of arm, but strength of will. Perhaps, belief. He needed to believe. Was that it? He knelt before the tree and then placed a hand on the bark. Who are you? He thought desperately. Why have you done this? How can I persuade my family that I am not mad, that I have seen the future and how terrible it is? How can I protect my family from the storm that is coming? How can I protect the North? Nothing happened, and he faltered for a moment. And then he stopped and sent out his appeal again. From the bottom of his heart, with everything he could summon. Help me, I don't know what to do. Help me. The bark seemed to warm, and then chill, and then warm again, under his hand. And then something seemed to chime faintly deep within him. Something that made him shiver for an instant. He closed his eyes, and concentrated. I feel you! Who are you? What must I do? Tell me, please. I have to save Father. I have to protect the North. The chiming seemed to arc upwards, and he felt warm for a moment. For a dizzying instant he felt like a spark blown upwards from a fire. What was happening to him? Something seemed to be calling his name from the farthest possible distance, a thin sound right on the edge of his hearing. Who are you? Tell me how I can warn father. Tell me what to do. Why was I sent back from the moment of my death? And then a hand fell on his shoulder. He opened his eyes hurriedly and looked into the concerned face of his father. Warn me about what, Robb? And what's this about your death? He sounded horrified. He thought desperately. That chiming was still resonating somewhere within him. Less strongly now, but it was still there. He had to keep it. He had to find out what had happened to him. The heart tree was important. He knew that now. Father, he said thickly, trying to make his mind work properly. He felt as if he was trying to do something impossibly difficult by instinct. I must talk with the old gods. Something is trying to talk to me. His father peered at him and then hissed in surprise. Your eyes! There is red in them. Robb blinked and almost lost the chiming. No, no, he had to do this. He concentrated hard again. I am a Stark of Winterfell, he thought desperately. The blood of the first men flows in my veins. Speak to me. Father's grip tightened and Robb could sense his worry, his panic. Robb, I must do this. I have to know. I need to know why I was sent back. The chiming was stronger now, almost in time with the thundering of blood in his chest. Vibrating within him. You're trembling. Robb, what's happening to you? Father sounded out of his mind with worry now. Show him. Robb didn't know where the voice came from, or who said the words. Instead, he reached out with his free hand, and took his father's hand in a grip of iron. Help me, father. And then blackness fell. Ned found Robb in exactly the place he was hoping to. The godswood. His son was sitting on the ground and staring at the heart tree, muttering something just under his breath as he did, something that Ned just couldn't quite make out. He paused. He didn't want his son to bolt again. He had to reassure him, to get him to talk. But then he watched as Robb stood and walked over to the tree and knelt before it. Putting his bare hand on the bark, his lips moved as he said something under his breath. Ned took a step towards him, and then he stopped. Robb had closed his eyes and was speaking again, this time a little louder. Perhaps he was unaware of the fact that he was speaking his thoughts aloud. So fierce was his face and his pose, and then Ned finally heard snatches of it as Robb raised his voice a little. Who are you? Tell me how I can warn father. Tell me what to do. Why was I sent back from the moment of my death? Who is who? Warn him of what? And sent back from where? Death? Ned felt the blood drain from his face. This was madness. He strode over to his son, hesitated for a moment, and then placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. Warn me about what, Robb? And what's this about your death? He asked the questions quickly and seriously. Robb looked up at him and Ned hissed in shock. The pupils of Robb's eyes had taken on a strange red tint, not bloodshot but as if they had started to change to a different color. Something sparked at the back of his head. Some old tale that his great-grandfather had told him when he was just a small child. Something about the old gods. Your eyes, there is red in them. His son seemed to return slightly, but then frowned again in concentration. What was he trying to do? Well enough, he needed to call him back from wherever he was trying to go to. Robb! But his son interrupted him. I must do this. I have to know. I need to know why I was sent back. And he was starting to shake. Ned could feel it. But if it was his muscles that were shaking or his very bones, he could not tell. You're trembling, Robb. What's happening to you? Something happened in. The face of the heart tree seemed to come alive for a moment. And then Robb, in a voice that Ned had never heard from him before, grabbed his free hand and said, Help me, father. Darkness appeared below him and he fell. They fell. He was too surprised to say a word, and he felt something in his own bones. Where they fell to, or for how long, he could never say afterwards. Just that they fell, and as they fell he heard snatches of words, in the voices of Robb, Cat and others. Call the banners. Good, that means you're not stupid. Why, Theonon? We will kill them all. The king in the north. The king in the north. No, not the reigns of Castamere. And then it stopped. He was in darkness. Robb was gone somewhere in that darkness, and yet somehow he wasn't afraid. And then suddenly he stood by a tree and watched as his son, dressed in plate armor, as if for war, hacked at a group of trees, ruining his sword as the tears poured down his face. Ned wanted to go to him but could not. He was rooted in place, as if he was a tree himself. Kat was walking towards Robb, tears on her own cheeks, but when she spoke to him, Ned heard nothing. Instead, he heard two voices, one old, reedy and querulous, and the other deep and low, like rocks grinding against each other. Why them? What have you done? There was a prophecy. The first voice seemed agitated. It was necessary, too much has gone wrong. Too many voices are stilled. Your plan was not enough. You have forgotten much. This seemed to annoy the first voice. Forgotten what? Things were in place. The boy was finally with me. I had my replacement. Kat was no longer speaking to Robb. Instead, Robb was on horseback now, with great Sawnumber and the Pick of the North next to him. Their steeds were stamping in readiness, and Ned saw Robb raise a steel-gloved fist as he pointed forwards. Death and violence hung in the air, and Ned could sense that men were about to die at the hand of his son. Where was this? What was this? Your replacement was just a part of the picture. You had forgotten that. We need the voices. We do not do this lightly, but it must be done. Otherwise the song will end, and we will be no more. Prophecy can be rewritten. You forgot that, and he is awake. The charging men on horseback passed from Ned's sight, and now he saw Robb on a field of battle, surveying the aftermath. He was pale and there were shadows in his eyes, the shadows that came from having led men into battle and seeing some of them die. The first voice seemed to be shocked. Impossible. I would have felt him wake. He woke slowly. He was ever cunning. An animal, but even an animal can be cunning. Your ancestors lost a good man when he was changed into what he now is. The decision has been made in any case. It was necessary. Your successor will still come to you. Another picture. A wedding? He could see faces that he recognized. Was that Brynden Tully? And Walder Frey, the old man who kept outliving everyone else? And Robb and Kat? Wait. Ned's eyes widened as the first crossbow quarrel was shot into his son, who jerked wildly. No, this could not be. How long must I wait? The first voice said the words bitterly. Not long. Not long by your time or mine. Yours. Another quarrel hit Robb as he tried to stand. Blood was flying everywhere now as a massacre started, as men knifed other men under the grinning gaze of the old man at the high table, with the eyes of a lunatic. No. His son was dying. He had to do something to stop this. Very well. Who will tell them? We have picked out someone. Another bolt. Ned wanted to scream his son's name, wanted to get to him, wanted to upturn the tables and use them to protect him. And then he caught sight of a man standing up and walking calmly towards Robb. Roose Bolton. Ned sighed. Roose was a good man. He would save Robb, if only he would move faster. Wait, he had a knife in his hand. And his eyes were alive in a strange mad way, with a glitter and a look that Ned had never seen before. No, he would not. Tyrion Lannister sends his regards. The knife went home, and blackness fell again. When Ned opened his eyes again, he was on his knees in a godswood of stone. Everything was stone. The trees, the moss, the ground. Overhead the sky was overcast, and there were statues of men everywhere, dressed in a variety of armor. Some wore skins like the hill tribes, some wore crude armor, and some wore plate, but an ancient variety. All held grounded weapons, with their faces turned down to face the earth. Ned stood shakily, and then took an equally shaky step. Where am I? He might as well have asked the wind, which was present.
In a place where words mean something, said a voice, and he turned to see an old man step out from the trees.
He had to be the oldest man he had ever laid eyes on, dressed in robes like a maester and with a simple belt around his waist. As he approached, Ned swallowed. His eyes were the same color as the sapta of a weirwood tree.
You are a Stark, are you not?
I am, Ned said. I am the Lord of Winterfell, Ned Stark. The old man looked him up and down and sniffed caustically. So this is what my family has become. It is of no matter. You are a child, and you have forgotten everything of consequence. A stone wolf indeed. Ned blinked. You are a Stark? He looked at the old man again. Yes, there were traces of the Stark features beneath all those wrinkles. One of the first, the old man said firmly. Words have meaning here. Names even more so. Stark. What does it mean? It is our name, Ned said. confused. The old man rolled his eyes in disgust. No, you do not see. Stark. It means plain, the plainest of possible views. We always strip things down to the basics. Boy, we see things as they are. Winter is always coming. That is the strength of our house. You have let them weaken that view. Ned asked, bewildered. The fools to the south, with their fripperies and their jealousies and their foolishness, your eyes should be in the north. Winter is coming, and a mistake was made. Your son was not warned. Robb. Where is he? I was with him in the weirwood. What happened? The old man growled. Listen to me, you foolish boy. You child. Winter is coming. That is why the old gods brought your son back. Back from his useless death in the south. Back from the foolishness that killed so many good men of the north. Death marches on the wall. Death and worse. Ned stared at the old man. Who was he? Bran, the builder? Garth Greenhand? Then he swallowed. What could be worse than death? The old man smiled. At last a good question. The others are coming, boy. They are awake again. The north must be ready, but to do so, the south must be at peace. Listen to your son and his tale of woe. Listen to his tale of what went wrong. Prepare. You must be ready. They did this. They brought him back. Ned felt the hairs on the back of neck stand on end. He was being watched by a great number of eyes. He could sense them. Who are they? The old man looked over his shoulder and then smiled. See for yourself. And then he faded from sight, like fog on a hot day. Ned paused for a moment, looking at the stone trees around him. And then he turned. The statues were all looking at him, their eyes filled with green fire. They were old. He could tell just by looking at them, eons old. The stone beneath him splintered, and then cracked, and he let out a wordless cry as he fell into the darkness again. When he woke, he was by the heart tree again, sprawled on the grass as if he had been sleeping. Robb was still kneeling next to him, one hand on the trunk, his eyes closed in exhaustion. Ned swallowed and then finally croaked. Robb? His son jerked slightly, and then opened his own eyes. Father? He stood, slowly, feeling as if every muscle and bone in his body had been strained. We must talk. Now, in my solar. Luwin. There was always something to be dealt with in a place like Winterfell. There were ravens to be fed, messages passed on, people's illnesses treated, and 101 other things. And yet that didn't make the worry about young Robb go away at all. He turned a corner and then stopped dead in his tracks. Ned Stark was helping Robb down the corridor, or rather half-dragging him, with one of Robb's arms draped over his father's shoulder. Robb's head hung low and Luwin could not tell if he was awake or not. Judging by the stumbling feet, he was suspended between awake and asleep. My lord! Luwin exclaimed as he scurried over and supported Robb on his other side, draping the other arm over his own shoulders and supporting the exhausted youth. What happened? Found him in the Godswood, Ned gasped, and Luwin looked at him sharply. The man looked as if he was exhausted himself, and, my lord, your eyes. What of them? There is a redness to them, in your pupils. Ned sighed. I feared that, hopefully it will fade. Robb will have it as well. They reached the door to Ned's solar, which Ned opened with one hand. They brought Robb inside, deposited him in one of the chairs, and then Ned sank into his own chair with a groan. You should see to Robb. Luwin was already doing that, even as Ned spoke the words. He noted the weariness in his face, and then gently forced one eye open. Yes, there was red in his pupil as well, but it was fading even as he looked at it. As for the rest of Robb, there were odd scratches on one hand, and his knees were damp from dew. He seems fine, but totally exhausted, my lord. Then he looked at Ned. As do you, the redness in your eyes is going, as it is in Robb's. My lord, what happened? The Lord of Winterfell passed a shaking hand over his beard, and then smiled wryly before standing with a groan and crossing to the table in the corner, where he poured 3 goblets of wine. Get that in him, he commanded, and then have some yourself. You'll need it. He handed the goblets over and then drank from his own. Luwin placed the container to Robb's lips. Robb, he barked, you need to drink this. Robb, open your eyes. The youth groaned like a sleepy child, but then obediently opened his mouth and drank. There was more than a hint of splutter as he did so, but the wine seemed to refresh him a little. Luwin looked him over again, and then sipped his own wine. Why will I need this? It isn't every day that you hear that two people have talked with the old gods. Ned said the words with the utmost seriousness, as a deeply shocked Lewin stared at him. The old gods? Ned nodded somberly, and then looked at his son. I found him where you suggested, Lewin, in the Godswood. He was kneeling in front of the heart tree, asking it for answers. Asking how he could warn me. Asking why he was sent back from the moment, he faltered, his voice cracking for an instant. From the moment of his death, I thought his wits were addled. Lewin, but then I saw his eyes. The red was stronger, like the sept of the trees around us both in the Godswood. And then he grabbed my hand and I had a vision, Lewin. I saw flashes of Robb in different places. In one he was leading a charge of northern heavy cavalry. In another he was walking amidst the bodies from a battle. Ned clenched his fists for a moment. And I saw him die, Lewin. I saw my own son die. He choked each word out, as if they hurt his mouth. Lewin calmed his whirling thoughts with another sip of wine. Pardon me for asking this, my lord, but where did you see him die? Ned leant back in his chair and closed his eyes for a long moment. It must have been at the Twins, he said, eventually. I saw Walder Frey, there. The filthy swine broke guest rights. He had his men murder Robb, and his own men. Crossbows and knives, and he hesitated again. I saw who wielded the knife for the killer blow. Roose Bolton. Lewin felt his eyebrows fly upwards. Lord Bolton, the Lord of the Dreadfort, why would he kill your son? I know not, Ned grated. I know that he is loyal to me, but the Boltons used to fight the Starks for the right to lead the North in the Age of Heroes. And old dreams die hard. I heard voices as well, saying that things had changed, that things had gone wrong, that things needed to be changed, that too many voices had been stilled. That's an old phrase, Lewin. My grandfather used to use it. When voices are stilled, people have died. And then? Lewin prompted gently. And then I think I met one of my ancestors, Ned said with a wry smile. Made as that sounds, he said that I was a child, that my eyes were in the south and not on the north. He said that the north needed to be strong, and that the others have returned. A silence fell. Well, this was a strange tale indeed. Eddard, he said carefully, you must admit that this is an outlandish tale. If anyone else had told me of what you have seen, I would dismiss it as the ravings of a madman, especially as the others have not been seen in thousands of years. Speaking as a maester, my training tells me that what you have said cannot be true. And yet I am of the north, and I witness the redness in your eyes. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. I will send a raven to the citadel at Old Town, to ask if the glass candles are burning again. Ned looked at him carefully. You have always said that magic is impossible now. Not quite, my lord, Lewin said with a wintry smile. I just said that I cannot practice it, as I have never seen it. And yet, something is changing. I can feel it in my bones. I have had the oddest feeling of being watched in the Godswood. And your tale disturbs me. If the old gods are taking an interest in the deeds of man again. Ned nodded. Send a raven to Castle Black, as well. I need to discuss this with Benjen. He pulled a slight face. That is if he won't try and have me treated by you for madness. I need to find out what's happening at the wall, and then I need to talk to Robert to strengthen the Night's Watch. God knows that it's been neglected. Father, they both turned to see Robb starting to stir. Lewin cast an eye over the young man. Yes, he was waking. Robb, he remembered seeing his father at the heart tree, and then the darkness and the visions, flashes of his life and his death. And then his father in a forest of stone trees, talking to an old man, and then darkness, with flashes of a sense that he was being dragged somewhere and told to drink something. When he woke again, it was to the rumble of voices. Father. He was father, and Lewin, they were talking about him, about the old gods. He made a monumental effort, and finally opened his eyes. Father. That simple word seemed to take all his strength. Robb, drink some of this, Lewin said quietly, as he handed over the third goblet. How do you feel? Tired? Lewin. Father, what happened? Father leaned forwards. The old gods. Robb. They spoke to me. What do you remember? He sipped the rich red wine, slowly, as he cast his mind back. Parts of my life, the charge at the Battle of Oscross, the day after the crag, and... He closed his eyes for a long moment. The wedding at the Twins, Where you died, Robb. I saw it. His father looked at him gravely. The old gods have sent you back, and now I must ask. I saw you and your mother in those visions, but not myself. Where was I? Robb drank more wine and then scrubbed at his eyes. You were dead, father, he said hoarsely. You were dead. Luwin and father shared a long and horrified look. How? Father said quietly. It's a long story, Robb replied. He felt stronger now. It will start soon. In about 2 months, word will reach you that Jon Arryn is dead. And that shook father, who blinked and then drank his own wine with a trembling hand. What caused it? Mother will get a letter from Aunt Lysa, claiming that it was poison. And now father's grief gave way to anger. Poison? Who would poison him, and why? Aunt Lysa said it was the Lannisters. Father, the king came north to name you his hand. You agreed, and went south to King's Landing, and you never left there. There was a plot by the Lannisters, something we think that Jon Arryn must have discovered. He looked over at the closed door, and then leant forwards. King Robert brought his children here, including Joffrey, who is cruel and mad, and they're all blonde, father. Every one of them. Father frowned. I don't understand. King Robert's bastards are all black of hair. His brother Stannis sent word of this. Why should his bastards be black of hair and blue of eye, but his children blonde of hair and green of eye? Especially when every time a Baratheon has married a Lannister, the Baratheon blood has won out. Father frowned at this, but it was Luwin who caught on first, sitting back as his eyebrows flew up to where his hairline used to be. Oh, he breathed. And then again, oh. Father looked at Luwin and then made the connection in his own mind. Oh hell, he muttered. All of them are bastards. None of them are Roberts yet. According to Stannis, their real father is, well, the Kingslayer. Sarai de Lannister. This seemed to stun the other two men, who looked at each other and then seemed to communicate in the language of the eyebrow, as Bran had once named it, an age or more ago. We tell no one outside this room, Father said eventually. Not yet anyway. That is information worth killing for. I know, Robb said. I think that Bran found out. There were 2 attempts on his life. The first was when he fell from one of the disused towers here. He lived, but he lost the use of his legs, and he could not remember what happened. We realized later that he must have been pushed. The second was later, when a man with a dagger made of Valyrian steel tried to stab him in his bed. Mother and his direwolf Summer stopped him. Father had turned a nasty red color. Now, someone, he said in a voice of thunder, and barely restrained violence, tried to kill my son, tried to kill Bran. Jaime Lannister? That oath-breaking, smirking murderer. I'll kill him when I see him. Peace, Eddard, peace, Luwin soothed, with a raised hand. You cannot kill a man for something he has not done yet. And Robb, what direwolf? He sighed and wished that Grey Wind was there with him, right now. He had the oddest feeling that the direwolf wasn't too far away now. The day you heard that Jon Arryn was dead, we witnessed your execution of a deserter from the Night's Watch. On the way back by the bridge, we found the body of a direwolf bitch, who had whelped just after being gored by a stag in the neck. There were 6 pups, 1 for each of your children. You wanted to kill them, but Jon pointed out that it was a sign from the old gods, the direwolf being on the banner of House Stark. He smiled. Mine is Grey Wind. Will be Grey Wind. This is confusing. Obviously, Father said with a small smile, having calmed down a bit. So I went south to King's Landing and discovered that the children of the king are all bastards. Yes, I can imagine that would be something to get anyone killed. Wasn't I able to get word to Robert? He died, Father. There was a hunting accident. Apparently a boar charged him and he wasn't able to get his spear down in time. That doesn't sound like Robert at all, Father rumbled as he leant back in his chair. Well, Robb said with a wince, he's not the man you knew, Father. He's changed. He's well fat. Father stared at him. Robert. Fats? Robb nodded. He drinks too much and he eats too much and well, when he came here he wore half the whores out and fathered at least 1 bastard amongst the women servants that Mother knew of. His father closed his eyes and passed a weary hand over them. Then he paused. Why only half the whores? The imtured Tyrion Lannister took care of the other half. But the King Robert died, and when you tried to pass the crown to Stannis, the Lannisters conspired against you. You were arrested for treachery, and even after you agreed to take the black after publicly saying that the accusations of bastardy and incest were false, that little shit Joffrey broke his word, and had you executed at Baelor's Septon, in front of Sansa, who became a hostage instead of Joffrey's prospective bride. And I called the Banner's father, the North Road, to avenge you. He looked at the ground and then closed his eyes. They proclaimed me king in the north, and we marched to save the Riverlands. I won every battle, but I still fucked it up. I'm good at war, father, but not at politics. To get the army over the river, at the Twins I had to agree to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. But after one of the battles I met Jane Westerling, and married her. That lost me the Freys, and I made the mistake of sending Theon to Pike, to persuade his father to send his Ironborn against the Lannisters. He turned his cloak and obeyed his father's orders to attack the north instead. Theon took Winterfell, burnt it, and killed Bran and Rickon. An ugly silence fell. I am starting to realize, Luwin sighed, why the old gods sent you back. Your tale is all of woe for the north. And no, my lord, you cannot kill Theon, either. He has not yet done what did in the future that Robb is from. Did you ever meet Balon Greyjoy? Father asked. Robb shook his head. Ah, that was your mistake then. A dark and cruel man, Balon Greyjoy. Theon is a good lad, but there are times when I think that he wants to be Stark, but then remembers that he is a Greyjoy, and he glorifies the Ironborn way without understanding it. No wonder he turned his cloak. The poor lad was probably overwhelmed. He stood and then walked over to the window where he stared at the landscape. It seems that I have been neglecting your education, my son, father said eventually. You know how to lead an army, it seems, and to swing a sword. The politics of leading men and treating with the scum that exist out there, well, that will be your next part of your education. I am only sorry that I did not do this before. He turned and sat down again. So, the manner of your death becomes clearer. Lannister plots everywhere. Walder Frey annoyed with you breaking a contract of marriage, as he saw it, and parts of the north in the hands of the Ironborn. No wonder Roose Bolton conspired against you. You were the last male Stark, and at last he had a chance to place House Bolton at the head of the north. He found tears coming to his eyes. Father, I have missed you so much. His father smiled at him. I am sorry that I was not there to help you. You must have had so many questions. Then he leant back in his chair and rubbed at his eyes. Well, I am weary, so you must be too, and I have a lot to think on. In a way, the timing of the old gods is appropriate. In a week it will be the new year, even if summer continues. And as we know, winter is coming. The new year was coming. He had forgotten that, and then something sparked in his mind. Father, we must send word to the Dreadfort. I think I know how to gain the lasting loyalty of Roose Bolton. If we act quickly, we might be in time to save the life of his son, Demeric. Theon! The arrow thunked into the center of the target, and Theon looked over at old Sir Roderick, who was pursing his lips slightly in thought. Then the old man sniffed mightily, and then nodded slightly. Good enough, he said gruffly, which coming from him was a compliment of the highest order. Keep practicing, lad. Time might come when you'll need that bow in anger. And then he swept away to talk to Maester Luwin, who was waiting with the blacksmith. I wish I could loose an arrow like that, piped Bran next to him. The pup's latest efforts were still all over the place. Epton looked down at him with a small smile, before relenting. You'll get better, he admitted. It took me time to get that good. Takes a lot of practice. Bran nodded mournfully, before looking back up. Tyrion, what's wrong with Robb? He snorted, plucked another arrow out of the quiver, and then sent it into the target. Don't ask me, I'm just his friend, or at least I thought I was. You're his brother. Haven't you talked to him these past 10 days? Because all he seems to do is prowl around and hide in the Godswood when he thinks that no one else is in it. The boy wilted. That's what he does to everyone. Mother, Father John, Sansa, Arya, even me. It's like he's hiding from us. Did something happen to him? Liam San frowned. No. That was the day after we got some ale from... never mind that part. Your mother wouldn't like you to hear that part. I don't remember him hitting his head or anything. And then the next morning he reels in like he was still drunk, and... I don't know, Bran. I wish I could help, but he just won't talk to me. He's talked to me. The Septon and Bran both whirled around to see Lord Stark approaching on quiet feet. He'll talk to you soon. He's been thinking through something very important. Robb's a good lad. He takes things very seriously, and it seems that I've been neglecting part of his education. He'll be spending less time here in the practice yard and more time with me in my solar, learning how to run the north. Brienne perked up a little at this and then ran off to tell the watching Arya, who was sulking next to their mother, who was talking to one of the servants. Theon watched him go and then looked back at Lord Stark, who was inspecting the results of his archery practice. Not bad at all. Tight grouping. We need to take you hunting again, lad. And then he looked at Theon and there was something about his gaze that made him feel a bit uneasy. You've been here for 8 years now. Theon, do you mind if I ask you a question? Of course not, Lord Stark. What do you remember of Pike, of your father? The peon blinked at the question. Yeah, I remember it. Pike, that is? I remember the smell of it. Yes, that was hard to forget. How tall the towers were. It was strong, he said, the last words with a hint of defiance. Lord Stark's gaze flickered to the towers of Winterfell. Towers always are taller to young boys than to men, he said enigmatically. And your father? This was a darker subject, and Thawne looked at the flagstones under his feet for a long moment as he remembered the striding man who cursed at everyone and who never had time for a small boy. He was always busy, he muttered. He was fighting a war against you, and I seldom saw him. Lord Stark looked at him, a long and steady gaze that seemed to peer deeply into his very soul. He'd never been the subject of one of Lord Stark's famous gazes, not really, and he quivered with uncertainty. And then the older man stirred and smiled, and laid a hand on his shoulder. One day you will be ruler on Pike, and when that day comes, you'll know what it's like to make decisions that affect a great many people, and it's hard. Any man who says it isn't is a liar. It's hard. Now your father's way of command is very different from mine. Ironborn traditions are not of the North. And there was a reason for that war that your father fought. A reason why so many fought against him. You need to realize that last part. But times change, and men change with them. Making that change happen is difficult. I hope that you'll always be welcome here in Winterfell. Robb is learning to rule the North. If I can help you, if I can give you advice about what it will be like when you one day return to Pike, and step out of the shadow of your father, the way that Robb will one day have to step out of mine, then the door to my solar is always open to you. He paused and then laid a hand on his shoulder again. You have been like a son to me. You know that, don't you? Something eased within him, somewhere in his heart, a tension that he had not known was there. Thank you, Lord Stark, he said thickly. That means much to me. Good. Now, back to your practice, or Ser Rodrik will chastise me for distracting you. Where'd Bran go? Banton turned and smiled. Off to see Lady Stark. Well, at least he's not climbing the walls, Lord Stark said, with a frown. Theon, if you see him climbing, tell him, in my name, to climb back down and stay down, will you? I will, but I doubt it will stop him. He's like a squirrel at times. Even a squirrel can fall. And with those worried words, the Lord of Winterfell strode off. The Septon watched him go with a look of total seriousness. There was a man to admire. Daenerys. He had been a league away from the Dreadfort when the messenger found him, a short man on a large horse who was quite skilled at tracking, damn his eyes. You are required back at the Dreadfort, young lord, the messenger panted. Lord Bolton wishes that you return at once. Daenerys sighed and then turned a yearning gaze to the road that led to the Weeping Water, and the brother that he had always wanted to have, especially after all the time that he had spent at the Red Fort in the Vale. There he had had brothers in all but name. Here he had a brother of the blood, but father had called him back and he would have to obey him, so he turned away from the road to the river and started riding back to the Dreadfort. He did not ask the reasons for his summons. Father would not have told the messenger, and the messenger would not have dared to ask the lord of the Dreadfort. However, he suspected that this might be a ruse by father, who seemed to disapprove of Daenerys' wish to visit his half-brother. Why he disapproved, he did not know, but then father could be secretive at times. The towers of the Dreadfort appeared first on the horizon, and he suppressed another sigh. He loved his home, and he respected father, but there were times when the shadow of his family's past hung heavy on him. The banner especially. A flayed man, a symbol of the times when his family had had men flayed alive. The Starks had stopped that practice, but he sometimes wondered if his father ever thought about it. He certainly saw a great deal of importance in being respected, sometimes even feared, in the very name Dreadfort. It spoke of fear, not honor. Not that he would ever speak of such things to father. One day he would be lord of the Dreadfort, and on that day he would build anew. Not before. The small party clattered in through the gates, Daenerys acknowledging the salute of the master-at-arms as he did so, and then he made for his stables, where he kept his horses. A boy came out to take the reins after he had dismounted, but Daenerys took the time to check that the horse was sound in wind and limb, and especially in hoof. His time in the Vale had taught him that your steed could be as important as your sword, and he thought fond thoughts about Lord Redfort and his lessons on horses as he tended to his mount. He found his father in his solar, reading from a small stack of documents. He was dressed in his customary black jerkin, and he looked up when he heard the sound of Daenerys' boots approaching. "There you are. You were heading towards the Weeping Water." He did not say it as a question, but as a statement of fact. He could not deny it. "Yes, father. I told you not to contact your half-brother." "Yes, father. I am sorry. I was curious about him." Father carefully placed the document he had been reading down on the pile, and sighed softly. "You should not be curious about him. One day, I will tell you why. That day is not today," he said, the words in an even quieter voice than normal, as if he was trying to repress some strong feeling on something. Then he looked up. "You are summoned to Winterfell." Daenerys blinked at his father. Of all the reasons for his recall to the Dreadfort, this one was the least likely he would have thought. The Boltons were the sworn banners of the Starks, but the two houses were not close. Too much blood had flown in the past for that. Too much rivalry. "Why, father?" "Lord Stark would have you visit Winterfell, it seems, and he desires that you bring much reading matter with you." Father sat down and stroked his chin, the way that he did when he was thinking very, very hard. This again threw Daenerys' wits a little. Reading matter. Books. Books on the old gods and the others, to be precise. A most odd request. Daenerys walked to a chair and, upon a wave of the fingers from his father, sat down. "I would have thought that Winterfell would have been the natural place for books on the old days, and the time of heroes." A slight upturn of his father's lips showed that he was amused. "Yes, but House Bolton has many old tomes as well. Many of them make little sense as they are so old, but we have always kept the records safe and dry and frequently copied them. It never hurts to keep knowledge, even if it is little more than legends of things past. The old gods and the others," Daenerys mused. "What could cause Lord Stark to require knowledge on things long dead?" He paused. "I would say long dead if they ever existed, but if they never existed, what is the purpose of the wall?" Father looked at him with what seemed to be surprise, and then no little thought. "An excellent point, Daenerys. All too often we forget the wall." He paused, and then shrugged. "Well, no matter. I am having the required tomes assembled. You will leave as soon as possible. House Bolton will assist Lord Stark on this matter, and when you are at Winterfell, you must ask what prompted this inspection of the past. You should take your smaller harp. They say that Sansa Stark is quite the beauty." He looked at his father affectionately, but with a little wryness to his smile. "You would have me woo her, father. A Bolton courting a Stark." Father looked back at him, his small eyes giving nothing away. "A Bolton always looks for any advantage. It is near time for you to marry anyway. You are my only true-born son. The name of Bolton depends on you. I would have you happy, my son. At the very least, see if Sansa Stark is worthy of a song." Daenerys smiled and then stood, bowed to his father, and then left. Well, he had many miles ahead of him. His brother would doubtless still be in the Weeping Water when he returned. Ned. Catelyn was starting to suspect something. He knew it. She knew him far too well for him to hide it, and he wondered how she could have dealt with the news of his death in that other world, in that future that he hoped so desperately to avoid. At some point he would have to tell her something. He knew not what, but he had to allay her suspicions at some point. Ned paced around his solar, like the dire wolf from his house banner in too small a space. There was so much to try and avoid. It had taken 3 attempts to craft a letter to Jon Arryn that had not sounded as if he had become a fool afraid of his own shadow, and finally he had taken refuge in a few half-truths and evasions, coupled with an offer that he had been considering even before Robb's return from the moment of his death. That letter had made him feel dirty, but it had to be written. A raven to King's Landing had been out of the question. From the vague rumors that had reached Robb's ears in the early days of the war, it was more than possible that Pycelle was in the pay of the Lannisters, plus he had apparently told Catelyn in King's Landing that Varys had eyes and ears everywhere. No, everyone had eyes and ears everywhere in that fetid, smelly cesspit of a city, and that the ravens were being watched. A letter openly telling even so powerful a man as the Hand of the King that there was a possible Lannister plot afoot to poison him would never reach him. He hated this. He hated the machinations and double-dealing and the lack of trust. How Robert lived in that bloody city of traitors and self-serving men with no morals escaped him, but he had to try and save Jon. And so Jory Castle, a man that he trusted with his life, was on his way to White Harbor, escorted by a small group of men whose sole job was to get Castle to Wyman Manderley and request the fastest possible ship down to King's Landing. Hopefully Castle would get to Jon in time with that all-important letter. He wished that Robb had been able to tell him his terrible secret earlier, but that was water under the bridge by now. He paused and stared out of the window as he thought everything through, yet again. If Castle was too late to prevent Jon being poisoned, then Robert would come north to offer him the position of Hand. A position that he had absolutely no intention of taking up. He knew Robert. He would press him hard to accept, and had a good reason to turn the offer down. A reason that required no mummer's act or honorless lies. He was needed in the north because the others had returned. A threat that he had barely the faintest idea how to deal with. Other than reading every book, every fable, every legend, and every song about how they could be defeated and then send as much as he could to the wall. There could be no war. Instead, the South needed to send what it could north. And if Robert came north, then they would come north too. The children who were not the blood of Robert Baratheon, as well as the Queen and the faithless shell of a Kingsguard, who had now betrayed 2 kings. He had an idea of how to deal with them. It would break Robert's heart, but it would have to be done. If they came north, that is. What if Castle got there in time, though, and stopped Jon Arryn from dying? What had Jon's plan been? How could he stop the war? Ned ran a hand over his eyes. He knew not. All he knew was that, as long as Bran was protected, then another thread from that future, that could never be, would be pulled. Bran would not be hurt, if his plan worked, so there would not be another attempt on his life. Kat would not go south to tell him about it, and she would not encounter Tyrion Lannister and start the terrible chain of events that would see Tatswell Lannister muster his forces and start to move east before anyone else had a chance to call a single banner. If, that tiny but significant word. He and Luwin had questioned Robb closely, asking about the smallest things. Robb had not known everything, or had sometimes heard something through a person who had heard it from somewhere else. Whispers in the wind, and he knew that such whispers could sometimes stray far from the truth. Well, this much he knew. He had sent a raven to Castle Black, requesting the immediate presence of Benjen. He had a lot to tell his brother, and then there was that other matter. It had been weighing on him over much of late. In the future that Robb had come from, he had never had the chance to tell young Jon the one thing that he had always wanted so desperately. Who his mother had been. Yes, he had kept the promise. Despite the hurt that it had caused Kadet, it had had to be done. He turned and paced about again. This would have to be done, carefully, after much thought, and after a talk with Bran about the fact that he was now banned from climbing the walls of Winterfell. He frowned. His son would not love him much for this, but it would have to be done. And as for Jon, well, that would be a different kind of hurt. Knuckles rapped on the door to his solar and he turned to it. Yes? The door opened to reveal a messenger. Your pardon, my lord, but the door wardens have sent word. A party of horsemen approaches, coming from the east. They bear the banner of the Dreadfort of House Bolton. Ned nodded. They are expected. I will come down now. As the man scurried away, he felt his heart lift a little. Hopefully it was Demeric Bolton, who in the future that Robb had come from, had died suddenly of an illness. If he still lived, then maybe the future could be changed. If such a small word, but things could turn on it. He strode out of his solar. Briran. At least Robb was back to his old self. More or less. For some reason, he hated seeing him climbing on the walls, and would either call him down or would hide his eyes as if the sight pained him. Which was odd. Robb had seen him climbing before, and it wasn't as if anything could happen to him. Could it? He sighed and then looked up at the skies. Far above him he could see an eagle soaring upwards. Oddly enough, his dreams of flying had diminished recently. He wished that they hadn't, and that he could dream those dreams again. To soar like that eagle, to see things from the air that no one else could. The sound of a harp being plucked, the first note singing sweetly in the air, caught his ear, and he scrambled down the wall to the ground, and then dashed around the corner. Domeric Bolton was there in the courtyard, his long black hair caught in a queue and his harp in his hand. In front of him were arrayed a number of people, mostly women, including Mother and Sansa. Not Arya though. He looked about and caught sight of an affronted figure stalking away with her eyes rolling. No, she'd probably end up watching Robb, Jon, and Theon sparring. To be honest, Bran wasn't sure what to make of Domeric Bolton, and he watched the man carefully as he started singing. He was very good at the harp, as well as the song. Should a knight sing though? Domeric had spent time at the Red Fort with one of the finest knights of the Vale, and that was a worthy thing to admire. However, Bran wasn't sure about all this warbling. He shrugged internally and then pricked up an ear. Metal clashing against metal. Yes, someone was sparring. He made sure that Mother wasn't watching him, and then sidled away before making a dash for the practice yard. There he found Robb and Jon and Theon, all stripped to the waist and all holding practice swords, ones that were weighted properly but blunt. And to his fascination, Robb was instructing the other two, watched by Arya to one side and a very interested Roderick Castle to the other. Keep your weight more in balance as you strike, Robb was telling Jon as they traded blows. When you fight, then your feet are important. If your opponent catches you off balance, then he parried a blow, rolled his shoulders and then pushed Jon so hard that he lost his balance and fell over. You lose. The Septon smirked at Jon, who was looking annoyed from his position on the ground, and then struck out at Robb, who dodged and then parried once, twice, and then caught Theon a nasty slap on the ribs with the flat of his sword. And watch your eyes. Too much movement betrays what you're going to do next. That bloody stung, the Septon groaned, before narrowing his eyes and attacking again. Robb met him blow for blow before turning inside Theon's thrust and shoulder charging him the same way that he had Jon, who was now on his feet and ready for another go. Not that he got very far. Jon swung up and over to his right, was parried, thrown off balance, and then somehow ended up back on the ground again. Damn it, he cursed. You don't fight fair, Stark. Robb paused and then looked over at Roderick, who was smiling sourly. Is warfare, Roderick? The sour smile grew sour. Never. If it is, then you're doing something wrong, and he's right, lads. Watch your feet and don't indicate where you're going to attack next. You need more training. A hand fell on Bran's shoulder, and he jumped slightly. Before looking up, oh, it was Father. I thought I'd find you here, he said kindly. Watch and learn, my son. It'll be you soon there. Bran thought about that and then swallowed nervously as he saw Theon and Robb joke about how many bruises they'd have in the morning. The three nodded respectfully at Father, who nodded back, but Bran thought that he saw an additional weight to the look that Father sent to Robb, some wordless message that he could not decipher. Oh, not another one with the language of the eyebrow. I hear Domeric Bolton singing. Father said jovially, you do not want to hear. He's singing, Father, said Bran as he tried not to roll his eyes. And playing the harp. Haven't seen him sparring yet. You should see him ride a horse, Father said seriously, which made Bran look at him quickly. He's a skilled rider, Bran. He's very, very good. If you like, I can ask him if he can pass on any lessons to you. He thought about this for a moment, and then he nodded. Thank you, Father. Father smiled at him, and then sighed. I need to talk to you, Brandon. Brandon, that was not a good sign at all. It meant that Father was being very serious. Even worse, Father then escorted him up to his solar, the place that was normally forbidden to anyone outside the circle of people that Father most relied upon these days. Bran sat down in the chair that Father had indicated, and then looked about nervously. Then Father sat down opposite him and gazed at him levelly. Bran! Yes, Father. I want you to stop climbing the walls of Winterfell. The towers, too. He eyed Father for a long moment. All right? But Father was not satisfied with that. I mean this, Bran. No empty promises. I want your word. He looked at Father indignantly and then wilted slightly. All right. He sounded a bit petulant in his own ears, but if he had to get this out of the way, then he would. But again, Father was not satisfied, because he stood up and walked over to one side. Before returning, Bran gulped, with ice.
Bran, Father said hoarsely.
Swear that you will not climb the walls and towers of Winterfell on ice. The sword of your ancestors. He stared at it for a long moment, as tears gathered in his eyes. This was a promise that he had to keep, a promise that Father would not forget or forgive if he ever broke it. This was unfair of Father, And then he looked up and saw the sympathetic but implacable eyes of father. Bran reached out with a trembling hand and placed it on the hilt of ice. After a moment, father's hand covered it. "I swear that I will not climb the walls or towers of Winterfell," he choked out. Father smiled at him. "Thank you, Bran." He nodded at the words, his vision blurred with tears, and then he ran out of the solar, sobbing with grief. "Caddock, Ben will be here in 10 days, Ned said as he entered the room and closed the door. He smothered a yawn with his hand. "It will be good to see him again." Kat smiled at him as she brushed her long red hair carefully. "It cannot be easy for him to visit often, being on the wall." "Aye," Ned replied as he stood by the fire and stared into the flames. "There is much I need to discuss with him." He paused, and then started to disrobe. When he looked up again, his face was serious. "The news from the wall worries me. More wildling raids, more rumors of this king beyond the wall. Mance Raider, the weakness of the Night's Watch." "I'm worried, Kat." She stopped and looked at him. She could see the worry in his eyes. "You are that worried about the wall?" Ned nodded somberly as he slipped out of his breeches and folded everything carefully on top of the chest on his side of the bed. "Winter is coming, and this winter will be different, I think. I sense it." There was a tone in his voice that alarmed her, and she stared at him for a long moment. Ned was clenching and unclenching his hands as he stared into the fire again, which was a sign that he was brooding again, which was never a good sign. She finished brushing her hair and then disrobed as swiftly as she could. "Come to bed, Ned." He turned and looked at her, smiling as he did. "Aye, I will." As they slipped beneath the covers, Kat remembered something. "I haven't seen Bran climbing the walls once today. Do you think he finally listened?" Ned sighed. "I made him promise not to again, only this time I made him swear on ice." She looked at him, startled. "That was overmuch, was it not?" "Nay," Ned said with a grimace. "He's not but a boy. We've sought his promise not to climb again, and he's been tempted out of it again and again. Well, this time it must be different. He's starting to learn what it is to fight and to be a man. He must take up a man's responsibilities, and his word must stand for something. He'll keep his promise this time. I think he hates me for it, but he'll keep it." "Oh, Ned," she sighed as she put her arm around him and snuggled against him. "You're his father. He loves you. He can never hate you. He's young. He's resentful. He'll learn." Ned paused again. "Sansa seems very taken with young Daenerys." Kat nodded slowly. "The lad is not what I expected. He plays the harp very well indeed, and he is soft-spoken and courteous. Not at all what I thought that the son of Rose Bolton would be like." "Aye, that was my thought too. He takes after his mother, I think, in temperament at least. He is a fine horseman though. No, better than fine. Born in the saddle, as John Arryn would say." And then he seemed to leave the room for a moment, as his eyes stared at some spot on the ceiling. Nedad. She elbowed him gently in the ribs, and he seemed to return from wherever his thoughts had taken him. "What were you thinking about?" He smiled in a rather strained fashion. "Just hoping that an important message gets to him in King's Landing. In the meantime, I think it is time that we reluctantly start to think about marriage alliances for Robb and Sansa. I don't like to think about these things, as it reminds me of my father and his endless intrigues, but I think that it must be done." His face set slightly. "Robb needs advice on who to marry, I think. I've been neglecting his studies on treating with our friendly and not-so-friendly neighbors." And now there was another note in his voice, one that she could not put her finger on. "Marriage alliances?" Kat asked. "Don't you think that it's a little early to think of that?" "No," Ned sighed. "I don't. What's happening north of the wall is worrying me. We might need help from the south. Well, Robert may be king, but his eyes are on all the threats that surround him. Dorne dislikes him. The Reach plots, the Stormlands still haven't recovered from the war. Your father is unwell, in the Riverlands. The Ironborn sulk, and the Vale is loyal to Jon Arryn, who is not a young man, and whose heir is, from all accounts, well smothered with too much attention by your sister, whom I am also worried about. And then there are the Lannisters, who also plot." Kat stared at him in real shock. "You make it sound as if the Seven Kingdoms are on the brink of war." Ned stared back at her, and she thought she saw, for a split second, something red in his eyes. And then it was gone, as he smiled and held her close for a long moment. "Sorry, Kat. Too much brooding and worrying." We do need to think about marriage alliances, though. We should see how Daenerys treats with Sansa. And as for Robb, well, I have been scratching my head about him. She settled against him again with a sigh. Perhaps he was right. I will think about it. There are a few matches I can suggest. We have 5 children, though. Surely some at least can marry for love instead of need. He turned and held her in his arms. Yes. Originally our marriage was politics, but then it turned to love. He kissed her, and she felt her heart swell, as did her favorite part of him. She responded with increasingly passionate kisses of her own. Tonight's sleep would have to wait for a bit. When she woke up again, she didn't know why for a long moment. She ached in all the right places, and given the seeping warmth from between her legs. Ned had delivered more than his customary ardor. She smiled sleepily. Ned had been very attentive recently. Perhaps a girl this time. Ned moved slightly and muttered something in his sleep. He was restless. Perhaps that had woken her. She looked at him in the half-light of the fireplace, which was now little more than red-hot ashes. She was worried about him still. Whatever had ailed Robb had also affected her husband. She still hadn't been able to get a decent explanation out of him about the entire thing, which was aggravating. But then that was Ned sometimes. Him and his honor and his word, and his secrets. He still held them. She sighed and closed her eyes, and then opened them again, when Ned suddenly stiffened and choked out. No. Kat sat up and looked at him. He was dreaming. No, not a dream. A nightmare. He was sweating and she would see his eyes moving under his eyelids. His fists were clenched, and then he started to tremble. Not Robb, he moaned in his sleep. Not my son. Spare him. And now she stared at him in horror. What was he dreaming of? Robb in some kind of danger. Ned paused for a moment, and then relaxed, only to redouble his trembling. Ned, she said quietly. Ned, wake up. You're dreaming. No, he moaned again. I can't. I promised you. I promised, he said the words as if he was in agony. Promised, kept the secret. Didn't tell. Protect him. Robert doesn't know. He said the last words with great intensity. Kat frowned at him and then started to reach out to shake him awake. Whatever this nightmare was, it was distressing him, because his face was drawn as if in pain. She was burning with curiosity about it, but she did not want him to suffer. Her hand never got there. Suddenly he was awake and upright in bed, shouting a single name, Lyanna, Ned. It was the first time he had the dream in years. The dream about the Tower of Joy. And before that, he had relived the moment of Robb's death. That was something he'd had nightmares about before. But added to the memory of the moment that Lyanna had died in his arms. Well, now he had a problem. He was sitting in bed, shaking like a leaf, and with a seriously worried wife next to him. Kat had heard him cry out Lyanna's name, had seen his sweaty, horrified face in the wake of the dream. And what else had she heard? Ned, what's wrong? What did you dream about? He opened his mouth to tell her that it was nothing, but then he caught of her face. It was set in concerned but also implacable lines. He knew her too well to hope that she would give way in her need, to find out what was wrong. Well, perhaps it was time she found out. Kat, what I have to tell you is the truth. I will swear any oath you like on that. You will think it is madness, but Luwin and Robb will tell you otherwise. Robb, because this is his story. Luwin, because he found me half-carrying Robb back from the Godswood, where I found him praying. Half-carrying? Kat asked in alarm. Kata, the old gods spoke to us both. There in the Godswood, they showed me flashes of a future that Robb remembers, right up until the moment of his death. The old gods said that things had gone wrong, that warnings had not been listened to, that the others have returned. And because of that, Robb was sent back to us. Sent back in time. That morning when he burst in and looked so strange to us all, that was the day that he returned. She stared at him, her eyes intently studying his face as uncertainty roiled her own. Sent back. Sent back with warnings. Warnings about my death, about the capture of Winterfell, about the death of Robert and the war that breaks out because of that. Your death? Her hands went to her mouth. Ned, this is madness. I said that you would see it as such. But I swear that it is all true. And then he quietly explained everything that Robb had told him about that terrible future that he come from. going from the murder of Jon Arryn to the final moments at the wedding at the twins. By the time he finished, she was pale and trembling, her hands pressed to her stomach as she obviously tried to control her breathing and not panic. Walder Frey, she almost spat the words. Given how much grief he has given the Tullys over the years, over the most trivial of reasons, I should not be surprised that he would be willing to plot against our son. She wiped the tears from her cheeks and then her eyes. I have much to think on, Ned. Much to think on. Cat, this future will not happen. We have already started to change it. Demeric Bolton, according to Robb, was supposed to be dead by now, slain by a stomach ailment. And yet he lives. We have changed things. This startled her, and she looked at him for a long moment, before smiling slightly. That is good. You are right. Sansa is greatly taken by him. He nodded absently, his mind on the other decision that he had to make. There is something else, Cat. I dreamt about my sister, Lyanna. There is something that you deserve to know about that. A secret that I have kept, which I should have shared with you. The truth about what happened the last time I saw Lyanna. She looked at him and then took a deep breath of air. Very well, Ned. He sat next to her, his mind reaching back through the years. 7 of us were there. Howland Reed, Will and Dustin, Ethan Glover, Martin Castle, Theo Wull, and Mark Ricewell. And we were facing the last of the Mad King's guards. Arthur Dane, Ser Oswell Wen, and Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard. We'd tracked them down. We knew that they were in the area and that they were obeying Rhaegar's orders, that they were linked to Lyanna's disappearance. We found them at the Tower of Joy, a strange name for a broken old watchtower in the northern hills of Dorne. We found them and we called on them to yield, that their king was dead, their price was dead, and that the realm had a new king. He shook his head as the memories crowded through his head, thick and fast. The smell of the hot earth, the bright sun that had made him squint. The dirt on those damn white cloaks of theirs, and the look in their eyes, that mixture of desperation, grief, and worse yet, dull acceptance. They knew that they were going to die, and yet they still fought. Those 3 died hard. They were good. Cat, they were very, very good. The grunt of men parrying blows, the hisses and cries of pain as steel found flesh, the iron smell of blood. The way that the red drops spattered into the dust that lay thick over the old flagstones in the yard outside the entrance. They struck down 5 of us before Howland, and I killed the last of them. Ser Arthur Dane, his sword Dawn gave me this. Ned indicated at a pale scar at the top of his shoulder. If I hadn't dodged back at the last moment, I would have lost my arm, and then probably my life. But Howland got him in the leg, and as he staggered, I got him in the neck with ice. He ran his hand over his chin, and now the memories that hurt and which would always hurt people around him. Howland stayed to tender to the wounded. I hoped that Martin would not die, but he bled to death, and I entered the tower. The upper floors were too weak to stand on, but I found Lyanna in a bed on the 2nd floor. She was dying of fever. She thought that I was a shade from her dreams. First she thought that I was father, and then she thought that I was Brandon. When she realized that I was real, she wept. Apologized. She was so thin, Cat, burning with fever, and they'd left her there. Those 3 noble fools from the King's Guard. Fools who'd soiled their cloaks, soiled their honor. Ned took a deep breath of air. They hadn't thought to employ a midwife. Otherwise she might have not gotten the birthing fever. His lady wife stared at him, her eyes very wide. Midwife? She had been pregnant. He nodded, suddenly so very tired. He was sleeping in a cradle to one side. Not much of a cradle, more like a box lined with old sheets. She gestured at him. My beautiful boy, she called him. And then she seemed to come alive. She clawed at my arm. She begged me to give my word to protect him, to get him to the north, to Winterfell, where he'd be safe. She begged me to promise to keep her son safe. He paused, his voice thick with grief. I did. I swore an oath on the godswood here in Winterfell that I'd keep him safe. And then she smiled, and she fell back on the bed, quite dead. I cried over her. I prayed to the old gods to see her spirit safely back here, and then I kissed her forehead, and I picked up her son, and I have protected him ever since. A silence fell, a deep and heavy one. It was finally broken by Cats. Jon is the son of Lyanna. Yes. He is your nephew, not your son. Yes. He is my nephew. She flushed with anger. Then why, my lord, have you dishonored me all these long years by pretending to have a bastard son? Why did you let me hate him so much for fear that he would one day usurp Robb, and why would you hide his... She stopped suddenly and he waited for her to work through the chain of thought. By the seven, his father must then have been Rhaegar Targaryen. She hissed the words as if they hurt her mouth. Yes, he said gently, and given how Robert had greeted the bodies of the murdered Targaryen children with a smile, you can see why I did not want to tell anyone about Jon's lineage. He may be the son of Lyanna, but he is also the son of Rhaegar, and that last fact might still doom him. The only other person who knows is Howland Reed, who saw the whole thing from the doorway after Martin Castle died. And now you. He looked her straight in the eye. I'm sorry for not telling you. At the start of our marriage, I knew you not. I did not know of your strength, nor did I know that our love would strengthen to the point that I could trust you with anything. I held to a promise that I made to my sister that blinded me when it came to trusting anyone, and for that, Cat, I am so sorry. Please forgive me. Cat had sat there on the bed, her eyes on his face, but searching for something within it. Finally, she smiled slightly. I wish that you had told me long ago, Ned. So much of my dislike for young Jon might have been avoided. She looked at the bed. I did not know. I thought that Jon might be a threat to Robb, and above all, I hated the woman I thought had stolen your heart before we were reunited after the war. She looked back up at him and then smiled bitterly. He looks so much like you, Ned. There is nothing of the Targaryens in his looks. That was a blessing, he replied. It helped to hide him, and there is nothing of his grandfather in him. His father was odd, but brilliant. Ares, on the other hand, was a monster. There is nothing of that within him. He sighed. I must tell him. It will break his heart, but I must tell him, and then, we must decide what to do with him. He has mentioned joining the Night's Watch, and Robb said that that was he eventually decided to do in that dark future. He also said that in the last days of his life, Robb heard that the Night's Watch was making desperate appeals for help, which I think confirms that the others have returned. No, Ned, Cat said quietly. She had drawn her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, resting her chin on her knees in the way that she did when she was thinking very deeply. Lyanna's son must not go to the wall. If there is one thing that your tale of woe from this future tells me, it is that we need more Starks here to protect Winterfell. She closed her eyes for a long moment before opening them again. You must make him a Stark. Jory. King's Landing stank, he thought as his ship nosed into Blackwater Bay. It stank of people crammed into too small a space. It stank of sewers that hadn't been planned well, and above all it stank of corruption. He winced slightly as a particularly foul whiff of air went past his nose, and then put it from his mind. He'd smelt worse. Pike came to mind. That had been a bad one. The small cutter that the ship had launched after it had anchored approached the nearest jetty, and he could see that very little attention was being paid to him. Well, that was as it should be. Lord Stark had stressed how important it was to be quiet and quick for this trip. It was too important to waste time. He'd been lucky. It had been a fast trip south, and he'd spent much of the trip watching the land go past. He'd always liked traveling by sea, even if he was always green on the first day or so. As the cutter came to a more or less gentle halt next to the jetty, he reached for a rough wooden ladder and quickly climbed it, before looking around to orientate himself with where he was. Far above, he could see the Red Keep. An hour later, he was sweaty, a little more used to the stink, but above all ready to cleave the head of the self-important idiot standing in front of him from his shoulders. The Lord Hand does not see anyone who turns up at the gates to the Red Keep and says that he has a message. He is a very busy man. Give it to me and I will look into the matter. Gary fixed the man with a look. I am come from Winterfell with a message from Lord Stark, the Lord Paramount of the North, to Lord Arryn, the Hand of the King. Lord Stark charged me himself with this task. This message is for the Hand of the King alone. Not, he looked the man up and down. A door warden. The man seemed to swell up like a toad. Either hand over your message, or leave at once, before I have guards eject you. Gary set his jaw, and then pulled out a silver pendant with a dire wolf emblazed on it. This, he said through gritted teeth, is the symbol of my authority. I am from Lord Stark. Stand aside and do not interfere with a messenger from the Lord Paramount of the North. The door warden looked at the pendant as if it meant nothing, but the older of the two guards, who had been watching the whole thing with a look of sardonic amusement, came to attention and slammed the butt of his spear on the flagstone beneath his feet, joined a moment later by the younger one. "Pass, messenger from the Lord Paramount of the North," the first guard barked, with a surreptitious wink. This seemed to floor the door warden, who then looked outraged when Jory shouldered past him. "How dare you, guards, arrest that man?" The guards stared at him. "Don't be a fool, man. He bears Lord Stark's mark. I've seen it before. Want to get sent to the black cells by the king when he hears that you turned away a messenger from Lord Stark." The door warden deflated completely, and Jory passed on, with a smile and a nod at the veteran guard. The smell was lessened up here, perhaps because the wind blew it away. He could not say, but perhaps he was already getting used to it. He asked directions quietly, and soon found his way to the Tower of the Hand, where a sharp-eyed man dressed in the livery of House Arryn was guarding the door. "I am Jory Castle of Winterfell, here with a letter from Lord Stark, the Lord Paramount of the North, to Lord Arryn, the Hand of the King." The words made him seem almost pompous, but they had to be said to gain admittance. This guard at least did not quibble, but instead nodded slightly and told to Jory to wait a moment before slipping inside the tower, his place being taken at once by an equally sharp-eyed replacement. Lord Arryn, it seemed, was not a man who employed idiots. Hearing the sound of boots, he turned his head slightly. A blond man with a snowy white cape and a look of sardonic amusement was crossing the courtyard. "Saruman Lannister." The King's Guard flickered a glance at him, dismissed him in an instant, and then paused. "I know you, don't I? I never forget a face," Sir Jaime drawled as he turned to look at him. "You were at Pike." "I was, Serad," Jory said with a nod. "I was with you at the breach. We both watched Thoros of Myr go through with that flaming sword of his." The King's Guard shot him a genuine smile, like a flash of light from out of the murk, that I will remember until the day I die. That sword terrified the Ironborn scum. Damn near terrified me as well. He shook his head at the memory. "That was a good war," he said quietly. "A war that meant something. Your name?" "Jory Castle, Section of Winterfell." Sir Amy quirked an eyebrow at him. "You're a long way from home. Here to see the Hand of the King to deliver a message from Lord Stark." Sir Jaime said ironically, "We all have our duties. Be well, Jory Castle of Winterfell." And then he sauntered off with a nod, the sardonic look swiftly reappearing on his face. Jory watched him go with a slight frown. That was a man who was dangerous. The saunter disguised a man who seemed to always be on balance and ready to draw his sword. "Kamacha?" He turned to see the first man at the doorway. "The Hand will see you now." Lord Arryn, he could see at once, was a tired old man with more silver in his hair than gray anymore. There was something in his eyes, a strain perhaps at being Hand of the King for many years, since King Robert had taken the throne. But his back was still straight, and he still moved briskly as he stood and greeted him. "So you have a message from my good brother Lord Stark?" "I do, my lord," Jory replied as he extracted the bloody thing from his jerkin. It was wrapped in a stitched leather wallet, and he hadn't let it out of his sight during the entire journey south. "Lord Stark also gave me a verbal message. He said that every word within is meant truly, and that I am to wait in King's Landing until you have a reply for him." Lord Arryn frowned a little, inspected the wallet carefully with a raised eyebrow, and then pulled out a small knife and opened it, before tugging out the letter. "Ned," he muttered, "is being cautious," and then he broke the seal and read it over. When he had finished it, he reread it and then placed it on his desk, before turning and walking to the window, which he stared out of for a good few minutes, obviously thinking deeply. Just as Jory was starting to wonder if he had forgotten that he was there, Lord Arryn turned back, smiled slightly, and then looked at the door. Quill, a short man dressed in Arryn colors, entered quickly. "This is Jory Castle of Winterfell. He is to be housed in the Red Keep tonight. Good quarters and good food. He'll be on his way in the morning." He turned back to Jory. "Jory Castle, I will have a letter of my own for Lord Stark here first thing tomorrow, just before dawn. Lord Stark needs help for the wall, and I intend to help him. Thank you. You are dismissed." Jory nodded respectfully, and then followed the man named Quill. He had the oddest feeling that Lord Arryn's mind was on something else, completely. "John Arryn?" He went back to the window after Ned's man had gone, staring with unseeing eyes at the Red Keep and the city and bay beyond it. Ned never ceased to surprise him. How had he known? Or rather, what did he know exactly? His warning had been as clear as day to Jon, but then it had been couched in the cautious language of Ned Stark. Then he had spoken to him with wagging ears present. I have heard of great interest in the Westerlands of late concerning matters involving the payment of debts. Sadly, I have also heard of accounts of poor seasoning from there, and would advise you to be careful with regard to your meals. In other words, Ned was saying that his life was in peril, possibly from the Lannisters. Which was interesting because if what he feared was true, his life really would be in peril from the Lannisters. He sighed and went back to the desk, where he picked up the letter from Ned, read it one last time to sear the words into his memory, and then held it over a lit candle in one corner of the room, which kept lit for that very reason. Once the letter was well alight, he dropped it into the grate and watched it burn as he thought very hard and very fast. If Ned had somehow stumbled onto news of Lancer chicanery, then he had less time than he had thought. He had hoped that he could deal with this horrible mess in less than a month, via some careful negotiating, subtle hinting, and threats of outright force. Tywin Lancer would be furious, but would also be intensely angry with the Queen for placing herself in such an embarrassing position. The implications for House Lancer would be interesting, but that was not what he was concerned about. No, he was worried about House Baratheon, which was suddenly balanced on a knife edge, caught between disaster and destruction. To outsiders, the royal family was strong, with 2 healthy sons and daughter. He knew the truth, however, that those children were pure Lannister, without a drop of Baratheon blood in them, which meant that if Robert died tomorrow and the truth came out, his heir would be Stannis, who had only a sickly girl cursed with grayscale for children. The next heir was Renly, who needed to stop whatever he was doing with Loras Tyrell and settle down and get married as soon as possible. House Baratheon might desperately need Renly to get a lot of children. It was that, or legitimize one of Robert's bastards, which would be dangerous enough as it was. For a moment he wondered what it would have been like if it had been Ned on the Iron Throne, and not Robert. He loved the man like a son, but Robert had not been a good king so far. He was a great war king, but in peacetime, he mentally shrugged and dismissed that thought. What was done was done. Robert was king, and he would have to be protected from this hideous secret. He had little doubt what Robert's first reaction would be, blind fury and a wish to bludgeon Cersei to death with his warhammer, followed by the Kingslayer. Tywin's reaction would be war at once, a war that the Seven Kingdoms did not need, even though such a war would lead to eager Dornish participation, bringing them out of their prolonged silence and isolation. The stakes could not therefore have been higher, which brought him on to the other issue, raised by Ned in his letter, which he pondered as he picked up a poker and used it to reduce the remains of the letter into a mound of ash. Good, there were no fragments. The Red Keep was a maze of passageways and blocked-off doorways and windows. He was pretty sure that Varys did not have any of his little birds in the Tower of the Hand, but he was not certain. So, important, and even non-important, letters were not read out loud. Important documents were locked away, and gossip was strongly discouraged. Not that that was a problem. His Velamen were loyal to him, and Quill kept a close eye on them. There had been attempts to bribe Quill, of course, but he had promptly reported them. The place was full of spies. Varys had his. Baelish had his own. Even the Queen had some. They tended to be about as subtle as Robert's warhammer, but they were there. Oh, and then there were his own spies, who watched for watchers. He replaced the poker and then stared at the ashes. House Baratheon wasn't the only great house that stood on a knife edge. House Arryn was right there with it. He had one heir himself. No more, because the line would end with them if he wasn't. Lysa had had too many miscarriages down the long years, and now everything rested on a boy, a sickly boy, who was coddled by his mother to the point where he was now seriously worried about them both. His son would have to learn to walk on his own at some point. The question was, would Lysa allow it? Would Lysa even allow Robert to ride his first horse? He doubted it. One day that boy would be defender of the Vale, leading its knights out to do battle. So Ned's offer to foster young Robert in the north was a welcome one. It would put his son in a place of safety with the one man that he trusted above all others, apart from the king. It would also give him a chance to get to know his cousins and build up some valuable friends for the future. The concept of friends was not something that Lysa seemed to approve of, and that was yet another reason to send his son north. He pondered the matter a bit longer and then turned to the door. Quick! The door opened after a moment. My lord, Jon beckoned him closer. I have a task for you. he said quietly. A very discreet one. My wife is not to be told about this. Quill's eyebrow flickered upwards slightly as he approached, a sign that he was surprised. I am yours to command, my lord. I am sending my son out of the city, to be fostered in the north. It's time he knew his cousins. You are to tell no one of this. You are to pack his things and then wake him in the pre-dawn hours, before taking him down to the docks with me. I will go there now to make arrangements. I needed to talk to Lord Stannis anyway. If any of this surprised Quill in any way, he gave no sign of this. Instead, he nodded seriously. I will make the preparations tonight, my lord. Who will accompany him? 2 guards, men that you trust. Who amongst my wife's assistants can be trusted with obeying my orders on this? The man thought for a long moment. As for the guards, let me think on this, my lord. Perhaps Willits and Rickson. As for your wife's assistants, Anna, my lord. She has a good head on her shoulders. In fact, the Lady Lysa has often scolded her for being too practical with regard to young Lord Robert. Good, then wake her first. Have her wake my son and then leave as quietly and as quickly as possible. Quill nodded, and he could see that the man was bursting with suppressed questions. Quill, my wife cosets the boy overmuch. I want to see how he does away from her, for a time, and I have been warned of a possible plot on my life. He whispered those last words, which made Quill jerk slightly, his eyes widening. I know not who or how or why, but Lord Stark warned me, and it is to him that I am sending my son. Lord Stark is to be trusted on this matter, should anything happen. I pray that it does not, Quill muttered grimly. It shall be as you command, my lord. Good. Now, he walked over to his table and wrote a rapid letter, one that had been in his mind for some days now. Please also send a raven to Runstone with this. He found Stannis Baratheon in his office by the docks. It was not the splendid office that his predecessors had inhabited in the Red Keep, equipped with hot and cold running sycophants, but rather an old warehouse by the docks, guarded by grim-faced men in the livery of Dragonstone. It was there that Stannis could personally oversee to the ships of the royal fleet that were in Blackwater Bay, as well as to quickly respond to any threats to the bay or warnings from Dragonstone. Lord Baratheon was standing by his desk with a plan of some rigging rolled out, quietly talking to a heavy-set man with a graying beard and close-cropped brown hair, who was missing the first joints of the fingers on his left hand. Ah, Sir Davos Seaworth. Excellent. As Jon approached, they both looked up from the plan. My lord Hand, Stannis said curtly, with a nod. How can I help you? Your pardon, my lords. I will deal with this matter. Davos said quietly, in a voice that came straight from Fleabottom. As he started to turn, Jon raised a hand. No, Sir Davos, I would have your counsel for a moment. Lord Baratheon, I need some advice from you. Stannis eyed him carefully. On what matter? On the matter of who the two of you might recommend for an urgent mission for me. I need to get a message to White Harbor, a message that will not be intercepted by the wrong people and which must therefore go by ship, he sighed. Along with a very important passenger, my son. Stannis frowned slightly. I thought that we were discussing the fostering of your son at Dragonstone. Why does he need to go to White Harbor? I will explain in but a moment. However, I need a ship captained by a skilled seaman who knows when not to talk about his cargo. One whom you trust absolutely. I place myself in your hands on this. There was the briefest sound of teeth grinding, and then Stannis gestured at Sir Davos. Then this is your man here. Sir Davos is absolutely trustworthy. I would place my life in his hands, and I would not be wrong to do so. The former smuggler flushed slightly. You do me much honor, my lord. I simply state the truth, Stannis replied. Young Lord Robert will be in good hands. When do you wish me to sail, my lord Hand? Sir Davos asked. First thing in the morning. Can it be done? A frown crossed the face of the man that some called the Onion Knight. He was a good man, Jon knew, loyal and more than competent. Would that he had 100 of the man, the Red Keep would be all the better for it. Then I will need to provision Black Betta at once, my lord. Luckily we have already watered her, as well as scrubbed her bottom. Low tide is 3 hours before dawn, so we'll need to warp her out of the bay given the wind as she blows now, and then anchor. I can send a cutter for your son's party to the second pier here. Will there be many? My son, a nurse, Perhaps 2 guards and 1 Jory castle, sent from Winterfell by Lord Stark, plus my son's clothing and medicines. Ser Davos thought for a moment, and then nodded decisively. That will be fine, my Lord Hand. Once they are all on the ship, we can be underway at once. Now, if that is all, I must leave and arrange matters to our satisfaction. Thank you, Ser Davos, Jon replied, and my thanks to you. You are most welcome, my Lord Hand. My lord, should I return here afterwards or to Dragonstone? Stannis stroked his chin for a moment. Dragonstone, I think there is much to be organized there. Thank you, my lord, Ser Davos replied, nodded at them both, and then left. A good man, Jon said with a smile, and a loyal one, you say. There are none better, Stannis replied, with what might almost have been a smile. And then he jerked his head at the nearest window. Perhaps we should talk on yonder empty pier. They did just that, striding out onto a pier that was in need of repair to make it safe for heavy cargo to be landed there. I thought that we were reaching an understanding that your son was to be fostered at Dragonstone, Stannis said through gritted teeth. I thought so too, and I beg your pardon, certain matters have happened that you should be aware of. For one thing, I received a letter today from Ned Stark. It was couched in careful landing, but it warned me that my life is in danger, possibly from the Lannisters. Stannis looked at him sharply and then returned his gaze to the sea that lay beyond Blackwater Bay. How could Ned Stark know anything about what we have been discussing? I know not, but obviously I am taking it seriously. Whatever Ned knows, he thinks that I am in danger and that the Lancers are involved. Whether or not he suspects the same thing that we do is unknown. But he also offered to foster my son, and the more I think about it, the more I am inclined to agree with him. I mean no disrespect to you, but if things miscarry, then my son will be safer in the north than at Dragonstone, because it is more remote, and we need the north. My son will also need to meet his cousins there anyway. A pause fell, followed by Stannis setting his jaw slightly, and then nodding equally slightly. Perhaps you are right about that, and the safety of your son is paramount. Very well. Now, as to that other matter, the fleet is assembling at Dragonstone, with just enough ships here as to seem to be normal. I dislike this mummery and can't, but it must be done. What of the gold cloaks? They are led by a corrupt and venal idiot. I should have replaced Janos Slintz years ago with anyone else a year or more ago. Sadly, I did not. He is in the pay of someone that I have no yet worked out. So, we need to either bribe him into doing his duty, or replace him, or bring men in that we can trust absolutely. Stannis looked at him. You know that this cannot end smoothly. He set his own chin. I do. Fury. The quarters that he was taken to in the Red Keep were not large, but the bed was comfortable. There was access to a place where he could bathe. That was a mercy. The ship had allowed him just the option of having a bucket of seawater dunked over him every other day, something that had not been offered when they entered Blackwater Bay. And the floating effluent that the tide was taking out, and above all, he could relax and not worry about that damn letter anymore. And the food was good, and the wine was even better. He preferred ale, but wine was the only option that night for some reason. Men and women came and went from the rooms around him, mostly from the Lord Hand's establishment, but occasionally from other places, and he found a spot overlooking the main courtyard, paid for a small flagon of wine and indulged himself in his favorite practice of people watching. At one point he saw Lord Arryn from a distance, in conversation with a small sickly boy, and a woman who had red hair the color of Lady Stark, and who had to be the Lady Arryn. But if Lady Stark was sleek, wry, and friendly, and ruled with a rod of iron, Lady Arryn seemed to be overweight, fretful, and to his mind overpossessive of her son. Then there were the others. At one point, a fat, totally bald, pale man in exotic robes pattered across the courtyard, his hands in his sleeves and his face blank of all emotion. Jory distrusted him on sight, for some reason that he could not pin down. An hour later the man returned. This time in conversation with a slim short man with gray hair at his temples, a small goatee and a look that combined cunning with smugness. The two seemed to be trading barbs as they walked, like two men playing a game that only they knew the rules to, and he narrowed his eyes as he watched them pass through a doorway out of sight. Something was scratching at his senses, warning him that there was danger here. And then there was the shock. At one point, just as he was mulling when to retire and sleep until the morning, there was a stir in one doorway, and a pair of men dressed in armor with white cloaks stepped through, followed by a tall fat man with long black hair and a beard that had the odd streak of gray in it. Jari blinked at the sight of the man. That was King Robert. He remembered him from Pike, where he had been perhaps a little heavy-set, but not fat, not like that. The king had stomped heavily across the courtyard, looking like a man preoccupied with many cares, and then vanished through another doorway. Jari blinked, and then sighed. Lord Stark would want to hear about that. He'd asked Jari to gather his impressions of what King's Landing was like these days. Yes, he would most likely want to hear everything about that. Sleep had come easily, but he still woke before dawn, alarmed by that mysterious internal notion that now was the right time to get up. As he pulled his jerkin on, there was a soft knock on the door, and he walked over and opened it. Quill was standing there, dressed in dark clothing. "You are ready to leave." "I am," Jari replied, as he picked up his small bag of possessions. "Lead on." Quill led him down the passage in total silence, their passage lit only by the light of a single lantern, then down a short flight of stairs, up a passage that seemed to be steeper than it looked, and then up another flight of stairs. When they came out into the open air, he saw a small group of people ahead of them. One was Lord Arryn, who was looking fondly at the face of a small sleepy child who was in the arms of a woman about Jori's age. Wait, that was young Lord Robert. Lord Arryn noticed his arrival, and then strode over to him. "Jori Castle," he said quietly, "I have a task for you. Here is a letter for Lord Stark. You must deliver it to him with all dispatch." He handed it over, it being stitched into what seemed to be the same leather wallet as the one that he had brought south, or near enough. "I shall deliver it, my lord hand," Jort replied quietly. "This I swear." "Good. I have another request. This," he gestured at the woman and the child, who had now fallen asleep, "is my son, Robert Arryn. He is to be fostered at Winterfell, as Lord Stark requested. I would like you to take him there. He is to be attended by Anna, acting as his nursemaid, and these two men as his guards, Willits and Rickson. Both are loyal to House Arryn. Once they are at Winterfell, Anna is to stay with my son, and the guards are to be sent back here to me. Here is a small purse of dragons so that you can keep my son and your party fed and watered along the way, as well as horsed." The hand passed over a small but heavy clanking pouch. "Now, ride down to the docks. There will be a boat waiting for you. Quill will escort you to the correct jetty, where the boat will be waiting. And give Ned Stark my thanks." Jari looked into the face of the hand of the king, and then knelt formally. "I will bring your son to Winterfell, my lord hand. This too, I swear." The older man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you. Now, go." They mounted quickly and then passed down through the courtyards and the open gates, where blinking guards looked at them in some surprise before passing down the winding road to the docks. As they rode, the light strengthened and the guards who had been holding lighted torches threw them away, the burning brands sending showers of red and gold sparks across the flagstones for an instant before they guttered and disappeared. Quill led them in the growing dawn light to a jetty, where 5 guards in Arryn colors awaited them. Next to a man who nodded at Quill, Serdivus, Lord Arryn's man, replied, "I bring the party from the hand of the king and place them in your care. Safe journey." "I will do my best. I can do no more," the other man said, and Jori recalled that this must be the Knight of Onions. Whatever his title, he quickly got the trunks and other baggage that they had brought into the boat, similar to the one that had rowed him into the docks the previous day, followed by the party. As Sarah Davos's men rowed them out with quick clean strokes, Jori looked back at King's Landing, before gazing up at the Red Keep. Far above him, a white-haired speck was watching their departure, and he knew without doubt that it was Lord Arryn. Concern roiled for a moment within him. He had a great duty ahead of him. Very well, he looked ahead. The ship was close now, north again. Away from this stench, Thelion. This is the greatest waste of time since... Maester Baldwin threw his hands in the air, almost grasping the air for inspiration, as they puffed up the stairs to the Tower of the Mysteries. Since that last project of yours, involving the birds in the giant cage on the scales that refused to work properly, Thelion asked, with a wry smile. This got him a glare from Baldwin. That would have worked. No, this is the greatest waste of time since... that other project of yours to see if you could use giant mirrors to set fire to Ironborn ships. Another glare. That would have worked as well if that test ship hadn't moved with the wind a bit. They continued up the stairs. This is still a waste of time, though.
Oh, I agree.
However, when Archmaester Tudyk tells you to do something, what choice do you have? They continued upwards as the larger, more heavily bearded man mulled this point. None, he confessed eventually. None whatsoever. That said, I still say that this is a fool's errand. Lowen's wits have been addled by all that ice up in Winterfell. They reached the top of the stairs and then looked at the short corridor ahead of them as they got their breath back. I hate this place, Baldwin said eventually. It reminds me of all the hours I put in to prove that something doesn't work. I hate that as well. The nearest door opened, and a cautious head with disheveled hair peered out carefully. Oh, said Maester Mar as he looked out. What are you two doing up here? Fillion peered at Mar carefully. There was a note in his voice that he had never heard before. It was more than the usual querulousness about someone intruding his part of the Citadel. It was fear? Something like that anyway. We're here on a mission from Archmaester Tudek, Baldwin said with a snort, a massive waste of time given the premise behind it, but we're doing it anyway. Mahor blinked at them both. What is a waste of time? What mission? Lewin sent a raven from Winterfell. Fillion muttered as he advanced down the corridor towards the room that contained the glass candles. Wants us to check on those wretched things. He had a theory, or heard a legend, or something like that. Waste of time, addled wits, and so on. Now if you'll excuse us, we have a short ceremony to complete, followed by the inevitable failure to light a glass candle and then a retreat down all those stairs back to more worthwhile pursuits. Plus dinner, wine, and normal life. You can't, Mar half shouted as he darted in front of them with a speed that made Fillion and Baldwin both stop and blink. I mean, those things should only ever be approached by a Meister as a part of his studies. Yes, there was definitely something in his voice, thought Fillion as he eyed the disheveled man. Well, he'd always been untidy, but now that he came to inspect the man's appearance, he looked gaunter than before, pale and with lines of care on his face. Archmaester Tudek, the Archmaester of Magic, amongst other things, gave us leave to do this, he said with a frown. We have full permission. Now stand aside. Maher wavered, clasping his hands together, and Fillion exchanged a worried gaze with Baldwin, who was frowning thunderously. Maher, the latter said with a growl, what are you so worried about? The man looked at them worriedly. Nothing, he said in what had to be the worst attempt at lying that Fillion had ever seen in his life. He stared at him, and then made the connection. By the seven above us, you haven't broken one of them, have you? I know of your fascination with them, your prodding and poking at them. Bar, if you've smashed one by mistake, the Archmasters will have your hide, or worse still, your chain. This flummoxed Maher, who blinked at them both. What? Broken one? No. Never. Fillion peered at him, and then relaxed a little. Well, in this case, he seemed to be telling the truth. Whatever was the matter, the candles were intact. Well then, get out of our way, Fillion muttered, and opened the door. The chamber inside was a simple one. When an acolyte was training, one of his tasks was a vigil within the room where he would try and inevitably fail to light any one of the 3 black candles. There they stood on the podium in the middle of the room, a testament to the fact that magic was gone from this world. Right, he muttered, as he recalled the words to the old ritual that was said to light them. Let's get this over with. You know, said Mara in a strained voice, I really don't think that— What the hell is wrong with you, man? Baldwin roared. You've done nothing but whinge and whine since you saw us up here. You know we are all masters here, don't you? You might study lost arts that aren't worth the paper they're written on. Less still the stinking hides that you have stored up here. But this is not your private workshop. Fillion tuned the men behind him out mentally and concentrated on the ritual. There were 3 versions of it. The longest took the length of a candle. The middle one took half a candle, and then shortest, but a few minutes. As Mirror started to yap something about the need for proper procedures, Fillion clapped his hands loudly, shocking them into silence, and then muttered the words quickly. As he said the last syllable, he stretched out a hand and gestured at the nearest glass candle. Nothing happened. No light, no spark, nothing. He smiled. Yes, a waste of time. Baldwin muttered what he was thinking behind him. But then, as he was turning away, he saw it, a faint shimmer of light within the heart of the candle he had pointed at. He stared at it, deeply shocked. Hearing receding footsteps, he turned. Baldwin was walking towards the door, with one hand clamped around Mara's right shoulder in what looked like one of his friendly yet forceful grips of iron. Meisters, look! The two turned, and then stared. Baldwin reacted first. This is impossible, he gasped. Impossible. What trick is this? Where are the ordinary candles? Where are the mirrors? He raged around the room, looking into all the corners and nooks and crannies. This is not possible. Filion waved a hand to quieten him down. Yes, there was light there. Not very bright light, but there was still light. His ritual had been said quickly and quietly and by no means with intent. And if he recalled correctly from his studies, all three could be factors in magic. I'm afraid, my friend, that this is possible. The candle is a light. He bowed his head in thought, and then with more intensity than the last time commenced the ritual again. This time looking at the glass candle next to the previous one. This time when he gestured at it, the candle lit with more light than before. It was hardly a bright and shining light, but it was enough to be seen. And then a light went on his own mind. He turned to Mara, who was wringing his hands in worry. You knew that they would light, didn't you? The man flinched from his gaze. No. Well, no. I hoped that they would not. They are supposed to be dead. Magic is supposed to be gone. I read about it. I might have wished that it was otherwise, and the man looked as if he was about to burst into tears. Baldwin stamped over to him and glared at the wretched, cringing little man. How long have you known? Each hissed word made Mara cringe. I was in here 10 days ago, with the 4th fragment of the Book of Malice, he stammered. I thought that there was a way of pronouncing one of the words, based on a book I discovered on dialects of Old Valyrian. And when I read out the words, the candles all woke. All three. Not very brightly, but I thought that what I had done was dangerous. I've been trying to research it all, to find out what I did wrong, to make them go to sleep. Valtharion looked at Baldwin, who subsided with a snort of disgust, and then turned to look at the candles again. Well, said the larger man, at least this was not a waste of time. I'll go and get the Archmaester. Perhaps the snows of Winterfell have not yet addled Luwin's mind.
Why can?
Dragonstone lay far to the southwest, and the ship was now beating up in the face of a nasty wind from the southeast that was threatening to push them a bit too far west. But Sepworth seemed to know what he was doing, and the course he had set looked good. Mikon sat with his back against the base of the foremast, under the main deck, and concentrated on carving a little wooden bird out of the piece of driftwood he'd snagged on the way in to the ship. This was a rush job. He hated rush jobs. He hated the stress. He hated the uncertainty, and above all he hated the fact that he had no one to guard his back, especially as he was on a ship at sea, that cut down on ways to escape, should things go wrong. He cursed the day that he'd started to work for that sly little bastard. Yes, he paid well, but there was something wrong with the man. He had the eyes of a snake at times, almost lifeless and unsettling. Well, at least he could make a decent fist of being a seaman. He'd been on and off boats for years, in King's Landing and other places. He'd never served on Seaworth's ship before, though, and he thanked his lucky stars for that. Last thing he wanted was to have someone frown at him and wonder where he'd seen him before, especially as he'd been used on a number of little errands that usually resulted in someone being discovered with a knife in his side, or in one entertaining case being found head down in a privy. The thefts were almost as bad, and the careful planting of objects could be a nightmare. Some people could be too damn observant. He carved a flake of wood away from the wings and peered at it carefully as he assessed his options. His orders had been hurried, but clear. Try and make sure that the ship docked somewhere near the fingers, and then try and cause enough chaos to get the child away from the guards. Easier said than done. This would not be easy. One of his favorite ruses was to use fire. Plenty of smoke, plenty of confusion, plenty of ways to escape. Only an imbecile would try and use fire at sea, though. Ships could be tinderboxes. A fire on board could lead to total chaos and then a fiery death, or even a wet death. So he needed something else. Something serious, but not too immediately dangerous. Something to force Seaworth to get to the nearest port. Damage. Or perhaps an emergency that required a maester. That had possibilities. He had to make sure that no one suspected him, and that would not be easy in such a cramped space. But he was sure that he could come up with something. Engine. It had taken longer than he had initially thought to get to Winterfell in response to Ned's summons, and the man responsible for that delay was riding beside him now, their horses side by side, his wrinkled face with his sightless eyes set in a look of weary determination. Maester Aemon was making his first trip south of the Wall for many, many decades, and his old age and blindness had made it a long and difficult trip. The old man had insisted on joining him the moment that he had heard of Benjen's summons to Winterfell, with every piece of information that Castle Black had about the others. The books are old, he had told Benjen and the old bear. Luwin will need help deciphering them, and I have read them so many times myself that I am the only one that can do this. I may no longer be able to see, but my memory is still an excellent one, and I remember every page and every line. Besides, I have sworn to keep these books safe. With no offense meant to you, First Ranger, they are more my territory than yours. He had exchanged a look with the old bear, who had shrugged and then allowed it, but he had the nagging feeling that there was something more than that about this trip. For Maester Aemon, something seemed to be driving him. He put up with the endless indignities of life on the road, and somehow Benjen had been able to find them shelter of some sort, every night on the long journey down. Partly that had been down to the extreme old age of the Maester of the Night's Watch. Many looked at him and felt awed how such an old man was yet still alive. The rising had been the hard part, and he had had to get Aemon used to the art of riding a horse again. Much had been difficult for him, and he must have been in extreme pain on many a night after a long day of riding. Benjen had had to find a rhythm to their riding together, to gazing at the road ahead and guiding them around the potholes before they reached them. The others in the party, the men with the pack horses, and the 3 chests of books, had helped him, and as they went further south, they had found themselves moving a little faster every day. It had been the hardest thing that he had ever done, which was ironic, but they had done it. The increasingly good road had helped. Benjen had noted the first work parties just north of the Long Lake, men with rough tools and bags of rocks chipped from the nearest outcrop, filling in the potholes, clearing the trees that crowded the sides of the King's Road in places. Not many work parties, but they were enough to make a difference, and the wood was being used in some of the villages that existed here and there along the road, to shore up walls and make them thicker in places. Winter was coming. Maester Aemon had noted those parties, had heard the sound of the work, and asked Benjen soft, careful questions, before falling silent and thinking hard. Ned was up to something, he could tell that at once, but he did not know what. And now the towers of his childhood home were visible on the horizon, and he sighed slightly. Maester Aemon, Winterfell is in sight. The old maester smiled slightly. Good, thank you for your patience with this old man. First Ranger. He smiled back, even though he knew that the other man could not see it. The honor has been all mine, Master Aemon. You have been here before. Many years ago, many years ago, I remember your grandfather, Edwyle Stark, and then he sighed and fell silent for a moment. And of course your father. Brandon nodded and then continued riding southwest in silence. He knew every inch of the ground here, and he knew of the old track that left the King's Road well short of the old spur that led up to Winterfell from the south. What was that? Master Aemon had jerked his head to the right and seemed to be looking at the woods on the horizon that lay to the west of Winterfell. Benjen looked in the same direction. He saw nothing. What was what? I heard the sound of a wolf, howling, a long way away and muffled, as if in trees. He listened hard, but heard nothing, before looking back at the others, who greeted his gaze with shrugs. I'm sorry, Maester Aemon. I heard nothing. Huh? The old man replied before frowning. There was something familiar about it. I have heard that sound before. Where though? They kept riding down the track, and had traveled about a mile before the old maester looked up again sharply. I hear it again, and I remember what it is. That is the sound of a dire wolf. Benjen stared at the man, and then at the woods again. Impossible. No dire wolf had been seen south of the wall since... You are certain? I am. We must ride on. Aye, we must. Signs and portents. First Ranger, signs and portents. And then the old man shivered and fell silent all the way until the guards at the north gate of Winterfell demanded their names and business. But even though he was home, Benjen felt a chill. The sand! He had to be the oldest man that there had ever been. Tywin thought as he remembered the little party that had come through the north gate not long before, and he shivered again at the memory of those sightless old eyes. The master of Castle Black, along with Lord Stark's brother. First Ranger Benjen Stark. It meant something. He knew that. A man as old as the maester did not come all this way south for nothing. He had seen Lord Stark walk out to greet his brother with joy and then greet the old man with great shock. Something else had crossed his face then, something he had not seen before on the face of Lord Stark. And then he had ushered them all into the main keep, and life in Winterfell had returned to normal. or as normal as things were at the moment. He was now sitting at the top of the great steps that led to the main hall, to one side of the doors, and with a mug of ale in one hand and a hunk of bread and cheese that he had charmed off. Eliza, the older woman with the curves in all the right places and a bosom that could suffocate a man, and as he ate and drank he pondered. Robb still worried him. Yes, he was almost his old self, but there was something there still, a distance between him and Theon, between Robb and everyone actually. He was focused on something. He was driven by something. When he was not training with Theon and Jon, who was as worried about Robb as he was, in his quiet way, he was studying with his father, studying about the various houses of the north, as well as other places. Lewin was constantly providing him with books about this and that, about house sigils and who was tied by bonds of blood or loyalty to who. He'd asked Robb about this, and he'd got a tired smile and a quip about father having set him more studies, but there was an intensity about him that had been missing before. It was as if he was waiting for something and trying to prepare for a task that he desperately wanted to avoid. Oh, and he'd also caught Robb standing on the parapets again, staring at the woods and muttering something about echoes and heartbeats. The studies about houses and sigils made him pause for a moment. He'd started his own research himself, not on the North but on the Iron Islands. If Robb was learning about how to rule the North, then it was past time that he started relearning what he knew about Pike and the other islands, about the Ironborn that he would one day rule after father died. So far what he had learnt had left him, well, he wasn't sure how to describe his feelings. He'd always been proud of being Ironborn, proud of his blood, his family, his people and their history that had been beaten into him as a child. Sometimes by his father, who he remembered as a grim-faced man with long hair and strained look, especially as the war went badly, but that history was based on reaving, salt wives and thralls. The iron price was the measure by which a man was weighed. This was something he vaguely remembered, but reading about it had been, well, a shock. He looked about Winterfell for a moment, and imagined for an instant what a reaving party might do to this place, only to shake his head in shock and puzzlement. What had brought that up? Seeing movement to one side, he turned his head and saw a raven watching him intently, to one side. Normally ravens tilted their heads when they looked at men. This one did not. It cawed at him softly, and then looked at something ahead of him. He turned his head again, and watched as a drooping Bran walked up to the butts again, with his bow and quiver. The lad had been depressed ever since Lord Stark had apparently made him swear an oath on ice itself, never to climb the walls of Winterfell again. It was a harsh thing to make the lad promise, but there had to be a reason. Bran grounded his quiver rather ineptly, and then inspected his bow. Tywin winced. The lad needed a lot of training. Boots scuffed to one side, and then a quiet voice said, "Your pardon. I did not know that you were there." He looked up, and did his best not to scowl. Gomeric fucking Bolton. The harp-playing song-singing horse-riding prick, who was the object of Sansa's increasing attention. He stilled his face, just taking my ease. And watching young Bran there, Bolton nodded, his eyes taking in the scene. Bran fitted one arrow to the bow, and then visibly sighed and pulled the bow back. The Ian winced slightly. His grip was all wrong. His balance was all wrong. And where was Roderick Castle? Young Bran is enthusiastic, but unskilled, Bolton said, echoing his own thoughts. Mayhaps he needs some tips. Mayhaps he does, Dad, grunted, as he finished off his meal and then drank the last of the ale. Sadly, Robb's at his studies. Lord Robb is most attentive to his father's commands. Bolton sighed slightly. At least he has brothers and sisters too. I do not. Well, apart from a half-brother who I have never met. My father says that I must avoid him. This darkened Tywin's mood a little. I had brothers. King Robert had them killed. And I have a sister, who I know not. Bolton looked at him. I have read of your brothers, and my father told me about them. Their acts, well, they were not knights, not knightly. The Septon bristled and then forced himself to relax. They followed my father and the old ways. The old ways. Bolton smiled bitterly. I know that curse too.
Theon looked up at him, startled.
Curse? Bolton looked back at him and then pulled his cloak to one side to display the sigil of House Bolton. Do you see that, Theon Greyjoy? The flayed man? The cloak fell back to conceal it again. My father sees no wrong in that banner, whilst I do. My ancestors flayed men alive, made a habit of it, a skill. Can you imagine that? He closed his eyes, his face twisted with revulsion for a moment. When they opened again, he looked weary for a moment. The old ways sometimes need to change and become the new ways. Tradition must give way to better things if those traditions were twisted and bitter. The Septon looked away and back down to Bran, who had just loosed an arrow into the ground in front of him and was looking baffled as to how such a thing could have happened. You ask much then. I would have House Bolton remembered for more than its past, Bolton muttered. And I envy you here. Envy me, he barked the words loud enough to make Bran turn and look at them both for a moment, before shrugging and turning back to his bow and quiver. I do. You have brothers here, not of your blood, but of your heart. You were brought up here. Bolton paused and then bowed to him slightly. Your pardon again, I must go. And then he turned and left. The Senin watched him go, and then looked back at Bran. The little idiot would hurt someone at this rate. So, after a long moment, he stood and pattered down the stairs towards Bran. You're doing it all wrong, he said, as he approached. Here, let me show you. Ned. By the time that guest quarters had been found for Maester Aemon and he had supervised the unloading of the books and their safe delivery to a very respectful Lewin, before taking the time for a brief change of robes as well as a nap and some refreshment, Ned had finally been able to overcome his astonishment at the arrival of the old man. He had been considering seeking the counsel of the last of the old dynasty in Westeros, but had been planning to visit Castle Black. To have Aemon visit him instead was a very great shock. And now he eased the old maester into a chair in his solar, and poured a goblet of wine for him, before guiding it into those old age-spotted hands. My thanks, Lord Stark, the maester said with a wry smile. Your hospitality has been most generous. Your presence is a great honor, Ned replied as Benjen slipped in, wearing clean cloths, and with his hair slicked down. Come in and take a seat, then. Thank you, Ned, his brother sighed as he poured himself some wine. Lewin is as a small child on his naming day, with all the books we have brought from Castle Black. He is reading, exclaiming, and copying, along with his assistants. Now, I am sorry to be blunt, but what caused this summoning? Yes, I too am most curious as to this sudden interest in the others, Lord Stark. As far as I was aware, they have been gone from this world for many centuries. Ned paused and looked at them both, before rubbing a hand over his beard, and then finally leaning forwards. But before he could open his mouth, he was forestalled. Lord Stark, Gaiman said with a sigh. Your silence is telling. In fact, your silence tells me more than your words will, given that you seem to be mulling over what to tell us. And that fills me with much foreboding. He looked at the old man and then sighed. Candor was the only choice open to him now. I have requested as much information as possible on the others, because we have had grave intelligence. But before I explain, I must ask you a question. How stands the Night's Watch at present? Aemon's lips pursed and he looked in the direction of Benjen. Tell him, Ned. One of the reasons the Lord Commander allowed me to come south to Winterfell in answer to your summons is that the Night's Watch is at the lowest ebb it has been in many, many years. Perhaps its lowest point ever. We are down to 3 castles on the wall. Our new recruits barely keep pace with our losses, and what we are sent, as you know, are the dregs, the scum of the Gauls, and most desperate men in Westeros. We need help. Benjen said the last words tiredly. He speaks the truth, Lord Stark. A decade ago I had 3 clerks who had their letters and numbers. Today I have one who still requires teaching and supervision. One of the reasons I came south is that I could not entrust the books that I have brought to his untender mercies. We need more men. We need better men, and we need men who can write their own name, and the need read it, and that name must not be X. And the wildlings press us greatly, as I have written to you about, Benjen said quietly. We have a missing patrol at the moment, and when we return to the wall, I will scout out to try and find something of what happened. The wildlings press you in greater and greater numbers. Do they not? This man's raider leads them and gives them a purpose. So tell me, why do they press south? Benjen frowned at him. Because they suspect how weak we are. That I do not doubt. Raider is a former brother of yours. Is he not? But there is another reason. Raider must know that if he presses too hard, I will call the banners, and his wildlings will be slaughtered. So he must be desperate. So, what is driving the wildlings south? His brother sat up in his chair. Driving the... Ned, you cannot be serious. I am deadly serious, Ben. We have had intelligence that the others have returned, from where I know not. I just know that they are back, and that is why the wildlings flee before them. That explains their desperation. He looked at Maester Aemon, who was sitting in his chair, his hands up his sleeves, and his face a mystery as his sightless eyes flickered from side to side, as if he was watching something or recalling something. And what, the old black brother finally said, is the source of this intelligence? Ned took a deep breath. The old gods, and before you call Lou in and ask him if I have hit my head on something, I have to say that he and my son Robb both know that the old gods have touched us. Robb first. They brought him back from a future that must not be, a future in which I went south to become Hand of the King, and then died in an intrigue of the Lannisters, after which Westeros descended into war, and the north was ruined and the wall was neglected. The two men stared at him, or at least Benjen stared at him in horror, and Aemon looked in his direction, with that look of terrible intensity. Oddly enough, Aemon was the first to speak. First? Who was second? I found Robb in the Godswood, praying to the old gods for guidance before the Heart's Tree. When I confronted him, he placed a hand on the tree, and then he grabbed my arm and then he told them everything. His vision, the full story of what Robb had seen in that terrible future. When he stopped speaking, he found that his mouth was dry and he poured himself some wine and drank. Benjen was in a state of shock, whether from the news that Ned had died in that future, or that he himself had vanished, or that Winterfell had been burned to the ground, or indeed a combination of everything. Maester Aemon, on the other hand, had a look of determination that he had seen on few men before. "Then my fears are justified," he said eventually. "Lord Stark, you of all people have little reason to love my family in the wake of what my mad nephew did to your lord father and your brother. But I beg of you that you listen to my counsel on this matter. You are right, death does indeed march on the wall. I have not the foresight of my ancestor Daenerys the Dreamer, but I do have a distant echo of what she had buried in my blood. And of late I have had dark dreams of a tide of ice coming from the far north, beyond the wall. I had dismissed this as forebodings from the wildling attacks, mere fancy on my part, but I do recall the last time I felt such a feeling of dread. 'Twas the day your father and brother died, as I found out later, and when your raven came telling us to send what information we had on the others to Winterfell, I decided to come south and to urge you to send what strength you can to aid us on the wall. When the time comes, I will call the banners," Ned said firmly. "I must first ensure that the South sees no war so that they can send their own strength to the wall as well." Aemon nodded approvingly. "And I noted by the sounds of repairs to the road and the logging of trees that you have already started to make sure that such a march will be swift, and then timber will be on hand to make shelters with and to repair the castles that are unoccupied on the wall." The old man's blindness had not dulled his wits. "You are quite right on all of those things, Maester Aemon. Then you have begun well," Aemon said approvingly, "and I salute you for it. But much will yet remain to be done. There is the issue of finding better men for the Night's Watch. We must have proof that the others have returned, if we are to see men more freely volunteer for the Night's Watch." "I had thought of that. Mention is made in the records here of things called whites," Ned replied. "Dead men raised again by the others, but raised only to kill the living. They must be burnt as even their severed limbs alone try to kill." He looked at his brother. "Ben, that is also why I have called you. It will be difficult and it will be dangerous. We need the hand of the whites." His brother, who had been staring at the far wall of the solar with a look of shock, seemed to shake himself as he returned from wherever his wits had strayed to. "You don't want much, do you?" He said the words with a strange smile. "Might as well as me to catch that dire wolf that Maester Aemon heard in the woods as we approached Winterfell." Ned stared at him. The dire wolf was in the woods. Time had almost caught up with them. Every moment would soon be essential. "Ben, I need you to get back to the wall as soon as possible. We need that hand. And Maester Aemon, I need to speak with you on a matter of the utmost secrecy."